You stand in the dark yard for a moment before moving toward the Springhouse. The summer night is warm and full of cricket song, but you know that a few steps down the hollow you will meet a different air entirely. The path is worn into the grass from 100 years of feet going back and forth with milk pails, and you can follow it without a lantern once your eyes adjust to the starlight. The Big Dipper hangs low over the eastern ridge, and a thin mist rises from the brook that runs beside the path, carrying the smell of wet ferns and cold stone. You take the first step downhill, your wooden clogs pressing into the soft earth, and the sound of the spring reaches you before anything else. A steady, low murmur that never stops, winter or summer, drought or flood. The Springhouse itself is a small building set into the bank where the water rises. Built of fieldstone gathered from the pastures and fitted together without mortar in some places, with lime mortar patched in others. Its roof is heavy cedar shingle, darkened by damp and moss, and the single door faces north to keep out the afternoon sun. As you approach, you can see the dark shape of the building against the darker trees, and the sound of water grows clearer, separating into the trickle of the overflow spilling from the stone trough, and the deeper trickle of the spring itself, rising up through sand and gravel into the catch basin. You put your hand on the wooden latch, which is worn smooth and slightly cool, and lift it. The door opens inward with a long, slow creak, and the air that washes over you is noticeably chill, as if you have stepped into a different season stored here year-round. Inside, the Springhouse is almost completely black. The small windows set high on the walls let in only the faintest grey suggestion of the sky outside, not enough to see by. You know the space so well that you could walk it blindfolded, but you take a moment to let your eyes rest in the dark anyway, listening. The water in the trough makes a soft, glassy sound, running over a lip of stone and dropping into a shallow pool that drains away under the floor. Somewhere in the corner, a cricket has found its way inside, and calls with a slow, sleepy chirp that echoes slightly off the stone walls. You can smell the clean, mineral scent of the spring water, like cold, wet rock, and underneath that, the faint, sweet smell of the milk pans resting on their shelves. Nothing moves. The air is still and heavy with cold, and you feel it settle against your cheeks and the backs of your hands. You reach to the left of the door, where a small shelf holds a candle in a tin holder and a box of lucifer matches. Your fingers find the candle stub first, the wax cool and a little greasy, and then the rough paper of the matchbox. You strike a match carefully, drawing it across the striker strip with a slow hiss that blooms into a small orange flame. The light pushes the darkness back just enough to reveal the low ceiling beams above you and the glint of water moving in the trough. You touch the flame to the candle wick, which catches with a little curl of smoke before steadying into a soft yellow flame. The candle holder is shaped like a small dish with a handle, and you lift it, carrying the light ahead of you as you turn to face the room. The Springhouse is not large. You could cross it in 5 steps. The floor is packed earth, mixed with flat stones, worn down over decades so that the stone sits smooth and level, with narrow channels between them where water occasionally seeps. The walls are rough stone, and in the candlelight you can see the patches of dark moss that grow where the walls stay permanently damp, little cushions of deep green that never dry out. The shelves run along 3 sides of the room, wide planks of pine supported by stone corbels built right into the walls. On these planks rest the milk pans, wide, shallow earthenware vessels set in neat rows, each covered with a square of fine muslin cloth to keep out dust and insects. The cloths are clean and white in the dim light, and they barely move as you pass, stirred only by the small disturbance of air your movement creates. You walk slowly along the first shelf, holding the candle so that its light falls across the pans. The muslin coverings are still damp from the moisture rising off the milk, and in the faint backglow you can see the shape of each pan beneath, the dark circle of the rim, the paler surface of the milk, and, unmistakably, the thicker layer of cream that has risen to the top through the night. The milk was poured into these pans just after the evening milking, while still warm from the cows, and set here to cool slowly in the constant chill of the Springhouse. The water running through the stone trough beneath the shelves draws away the last warmth hour by hour, and as the temperature drops, the fat globules in the milk begin their slow ascent. By morning, a layer of cream sits on every pan, thick and pale and still. You lift the cloth from the nearest pan, folding it back carefully so as not to let any loose threads fall into the milk. The cream beneath is white with the faintest tinge of yellow, and it feels firm to the sight as if it would resist a fingertip. In fact, you do press a finger into it very gently, not to break the surface, but to test the set. The cream dimples slightly, then springs back, and you nod to yourself. The Springhouse has done its work through the night, as it always does. The water temperature stays somewhere near 40 degrees Fahrenheit, even in the hottest part of the summer, a gift of the deep underground source that feeds the spring. This constant chill makes the cream rise thick and sweet, and it will keep for a day or two here without souring. You move to the next pan, then the next, lifting each cloth in turn and checking the cream's thickness with a quick glance. Some pans are set on the lower shelf, closer to the trough where the cold stone floor keeps the air even cooler, and the cream on these is slightly thicker, a full inch deep or more. Pans on the upper shelves, where the air is a degree or two warmer because heat rises even in this chilled space, have cream that is a bit softer, still fully risen, but with a more delicate texture. You note these small differences without judgment, simply observing, because the skimming will adjust for them naturally. The metal skimmer will glide through thick cream with more resistance, thin cream with less, and your hands know how to feel that difference without thinking. The candle flame flickers once when a small draught finds its way through the gap under the door, and you pause to shield it with your cupped hand. The shadow of your hand jumps large across the far wall, wavering over the stones and the empty shelf, then steadies again. The sound of the water continues unchanged, a steady backdrop that you have stopped consciously noticing, though it threads through every moment. The air is so cool that you can feel it in your throat when you breathe, a clean sharpness that never quite becomes uncomfortable because you are used to it. Wearing a wool shawl over your dress and a heavy apron, your hands are the only part of you that feel the cold directly, and you will have to warm them against your arms between skimming sessions. But that is a familiar part of the rhythm, not a complaint. You replace the last cloth and stand still for a long moment, the candle held at waist height, looking at the row of pans. There are 22 pans in all this morning, because the herd is in full summer milk, and the pasture grass is rich from the rains that fell in late June. Each pan holds about 1.5 gallons of whole milk, and from the whole set you will skim enough cream to fill a large earthenware crock halfway. Cream that will be churned into butter in the afternoon or saved for the next day's baking. This has been the measure of your mornings since you were old enough to carry a skimmer, a routine so ingrained that your body moves through it without your mind needing to direct each step. The familiarity is not boredom, but a kind of deep restfulness, a set of motions that require only presence, not decision. Outside, through the small high windows, the sky is just beginning to separate itself from the black of the mountains. The glass panes, old and slightly wavy, catch the first hint of grey light and hold it like water held in a cupped palm. You notice this change not as an event, but as a slow shift in the quality of the darkness, the black inside the Springhouse softening into something more like deep shadow. The candlelight, which a few minutes ago seemed bright, now appears more yellow and limited, and the edges of the room are no longer lost in total black, but are instead deep recesses of grey where the shapes of shelves and pans are faintly visible. This gradual arrival of dawn is so slow that you cannot pinpoint the moment it happens. You only realize after some time that you can now see the dark outline of the skimmer hanging on its nail beside the door without bringing the candle close. You walk back to the door and look out for a moment, pulling it open a crack. The cool air of the hollow flows in, only slightly warmer than the air inside, carrying the sounds of the early morning, a single bird calling with a hesitant series of notes, the rustle of leaves as the first breeze stirs the treetops, and very far off the crow of a rooster from a farm higher up the valley. The mist that lay over the brook has thickened in the hour before dawn, filling the hollow with a soft white layer that reaches up to your knees and hides the path. Above the mist, the sky has turned a pale pearl grey, and a few stars still shine in the west where the night lingers. You pull the door closed again, gently, so that the latch falls quietly into place, and turn back to the pans. The cold has settled into your hands now, making the joints feel a little stiff, and you rub them together briskly for a few seconds before lifting the candle from its spot on the shelf and carrying it to the far corner of the Springhouse where the skimming crock waits. This crock is stoneware, heavy and brown, with a glazed interior that cleans easily, and it sits on the floor directly under the lowest shelf, where it will stay cool. You have placed a thin board across its mouth to keep anything from falling in during the night, and you remove this now and set it against the wall. The inside of the crock is empty and clean, smelling faintly of the last batch of cream that was rinsed away yesterday. You position the candle on a small stone projection at eye level, where its light will fall across the first few pans without getting in your way, and you are nearly ready to begin skimming. But for now, you simply stand and breathe the cold air, letting the stillness of the Springhouse settle over you one more time before the work starts, the water trickling its endless soft note beside your feet. You stand very still for a moment longer, letting your eyes rest on the row of pans nearest the door. The candle flame burns steady now, its light reaching far enough to show the nearest shelves in quiet detail, but leaving the far end of the Springhouse in a soft brown shadow, where the shapes of pans are only suggested. You take a slow step toward the first shelf, and the wooden plank under your foot gives a low, muffled creak, the sound absorbed immediately by the damp stone walls so that it does not echo. This first shelf runs along the north wall, directly across from the door, and it holds 6 pans set side by side with about a hand's width between each one, enough space for air to move freely around them. The pans themselves are what you notice first, not as individual objects, but as a pattern. A series of pale circles resting in quiet order, each covered with its muslin cloth, each containing the same deep stillness that you checked earlier when you lifted the corners of the cloths. You decide to remove all the cloths before you begin skimming, and you start with the nearest pan, folding its cover back on itself in a neat square that you set on the edge of the shelf. The cream underneath is revealed again, smooth and pale, and the sight of it catches the candlelight softly, glowing almost like the surface of a pearl. You move along the row, uncovering each pan in turn, and as the cloths come away, the character of the shelf changes, the neat white squares replaced by the quiet gleam of cream. The cloths you drop into a small basket woven from split ash, the same basket you bring every morning for this purpose. And when you finish with the first shelf, you pause to count the pans again, not because you need to, but because the counting is part of the rhythm, a small moment of order before the work begins in earnest. Now you turn your attention to the pans themselves, not merely looking at them, but studying them with the slow, careful eye of someone who has done this work for years and still finds small variations to notice. The pans are made of earthenware, a common red clay dug from a bank not far from the farm and shaped on a potter's wheel, then coated with a cream-colored slipped glaze that fires to a smooth, slightly glossy finish. The glaze is not perfect. Here and there a small pinhole shows the darker clay beneath, and on the undersides the glaze is thin and slightly rough, where the potter's dipping motion did not quite cover every inch. Each pan is wide and shallow, measuring about 14 inches across the rim and only 3 inches deep at the sidewall, a shape designed specifically for cream to rise quickly and easily. The shallowness allows the fat globules a shorter journey to the surface, and the wide surface area means more milk is exposed to the cool air, which speeds the setting of the cream. You know this from practice, not from books, and you have never needed to put the knowledge into words. You lift one pan from the shelf, holding it with both hands, feeling its weight settle into your palms. The earthenware is heavy even when empty, and now with 1.5 gallons of milk inside it, is substantial enough that you brace your forearms against your apron. You tilt the pan very slightly, watching the milk shift under the layer of cream, and the cream itself moves as a single thick sheet, barely rippling. The inside of the pan is curved where the bottom meets the sidewall, a gentle curve that the skimmer will follow easily, and you know that no sharp corners exist for cream to hide in. Satisfied, you set the pan back on the shelf, making sure it sits level on the plank, and you check the next pan in the same way, lifting, tilting, observing the thickness of the cream, and setting it down again with the same careful placement. The shelves that hold these pans are worth considering on their own. They're made of wide pine planks, nearly 2 inches thick, rough-sawn from trees that grew on the hillside above the farm some 50 years earlier. The planks are supported by stone corbels that jut out from the wall, each corbel a single flat stone wedged into a gap in the fieldstone and mortared in place with lime. The wood has darkened with age and absorbed the constant moisture of the Springhouse until it feels cool and faintly damp to the touch, but it is still strong and it does not sag even under the weight of 22 full pans. You run your finger along the front edge of the shelf, feeling the slight roughness where the saw left its marks, and you note the small groove worn into the wood directly under each pan's rim, a groove made by years of pans being slid in and out. This detail connects you to the dairymaids who worked here before you, your mother and your grandmother and the women before them, whose names you do not know. All of them sliding pans across this same shelf in the same cool, dark. The arrangement of pans follows a logic that you understand completely without having to think about it. The lower shelves, those set directly above the stone trough where the spring water runs, hold the pans that will be skimmed first, because the milk there cools fastest and the cream rises thickest. The floor of the Springhouse slopes very slightly toward the trough, a deliberate design laid down when the building was first constructed, so that any spilled water or milk drains away and does not pool. The shelf above the trough sits only a foot above the running water, and the air in that narrow space is the coldest in the room, chilled by the constant flow. You crouch down to look at the pans on this lowest shelf, and the change in temperature is immediately noticeable on your face, a deeper cold that smells more strongly of wet stone. The cream on these pans is firmer, holding its shape so well that when you press a fingertip to it through the cloth, the indentation remains for a second before fading. These pans will yield the cleanest skimming, the cream lifting off the milk in one smooth layer with very little waste. The upper shelves, set near the ceiling beams, hold pans that cool more slowly because the warmth of the milk, even in this chilled room, rises slightly before the spring water can draw it away. The difference in temperature between the highest shelf and the lowest is no more than 3 or 4 degrees Fahrenheit, but that small difference matters to the cream. On the upper shelf, the cream is softer, less set, and when you touch it the surface dimples more deeply, almost like a thick custard that has not fully cooled. These pans require a gentler hand, with the skimmer a slower pass because the cream is more likely to break and mix back into the milk if you move too quickly. You note this fact without worrying about it, simply filing it in the back of your mind as part of the morning's plan, and you straighten up from your crouch, your knees making a soft popping sound that is the only noise you make. The milk in the pans was poured from the evening's milking, carried down from the barn in 2 large wooden buckets suspended from a shoulder yoke. You remember the weight of those buckets, the milk still warm from the cows, the way it sloshed gently against the wooden sides as you walked down the path in the fading light. The milk was strained first through a cloth to remove any stray hairs or bits of hay, and then you poured it into the shallow pans, filling each one to within an inch of the rim. The milk at that moment was still near body temperature, around 90 degrees or a little less, and it steamed faintly in the cool Springhouse air as you poured. You set the cloths over the pans immediately, tucking the edges loosely under the rims, and then you closed the door and left the milk to its slow transformation. That was 12 hours ago, and in that time the milk has cooled to the temperature of the spring. The fat globules have made their journey upward, and the cream has set into a thick, even layer. The process by which cream rises is something you have never seen with your eyes, but you understand it through its results. The milk, when fresh and warm, is a uniform liquid, a white river of water and fat and protein all mixed together. As it cools, the fat globules, which are lighter than the rest of the milk, begin to float upward, slowly at first and then more steadily as the temperature drops. They cluster together as they rise, forming larger and larger aggregations that eventually reach the surface and spread out into a continuous layer. The cold of the Springhouse makes this process efficient. The quicker the milk cools, the more complete the separation, and the more cream rises. In a warm dairy, the milk might sour before all the cream has risen, but here in the Springhouse, the milk stays sweet for a long time, and the cream layer is deep and rich. You have seen milk left too long in a warm kitchen, the cream thin and the milk below already beginning to thicken with clabber, and you are grateful for the steady chill of this stone room. You move along the second shelf now, on the west wall, which holds 8 pans arranged in 2 rows of 4, one behind the other. The back row is harder to reach, and you have to stretch a little to pull the rear pans forward, sliding them carefully across the plank until their rims are flush with the front edge. The sound they make is a soft, gritty scrape, earthenware on wood, and you wince slightly at the noise only because it is the loudest thing you have heard all morning. Once the pans are in position, you check the level of the shelf with a quick glance, making sure no shim has shifted. The shelves are kept level with small flat stones slipped under the planks where the corbels are uneven. And over time, the weight of the pans presses the shims solidly into place. None of them have moved, and the milk sits perfectly flat in every pan, the cream an even thickness all the way across. The earthenware pans have another quality that makes them suited to this work. They breathe. The unglazed spots on the bottoms and the tiny pores in the fired clay allow a very slow evaporation to take place, a slight weeping of moisture that cools the milk further by the same principle that keeps the Springhouse itself cool. You remember your grandmother showing you this once, holding a pan up to the light so you could see the faint dampness on its underside, and explaining that a pan made of metal would not work the same way, that the milk would heat and cool too quickly, and the cream would be thin and lacking in flavor. Earthenware holds the cold steadily and releases it slowly, so the temperature of the milk stays constant through the night rather than fluctuating. You have never used a tin pan for milk, but you trust the knowledge that was handed to you, and the results speak for themselves. You walk slowly along the third shelf, on the south wall, which holds the remaining 8 pans in a single long row. This wall does not have a trough beneath it, but it is the thickest part of the Springhouse, built directly against the earthen bank so that the stone absorbs the ground's coolness. The everyday heroes, it's not quite as chilled as near the trough, but it is still cold enough to set cream firmly. The pans on this shelf are slightly different from the others, not in shape, but in age. Some of them are newer, their glaze still bright and unmarked, turned by a potter in town just last year. Others are older, with small chips around the rims and a network of fine cracks in the glaze that have darkened with use. These older pans are your favorites because they have a weight and a balance that feels familiar in your hands, and their slightly roughened interiors hold the cream in a way that the slick new pans do not, giving the skimmer just a little more grip. The light from the candle has begun to fade slightly, the wick growing shorter, and you pause to pinch off the blackened tip before it can drop into a pan. This small action takes only a moment, but it gives you a chance to stand still and look at the whole arrangement from the center of the room. The Springhouse is a quiet world of ordered circles, the round rims of the pans making patterns against the dark planks, the round mouths of the crocks on the floor, the round disc of the skimmer hanging on its nail. Even the small windows are roughly circular, set into the stone with a slightly irregular shape that speaks of the difficulties of building with fieldstone. You feel the calm of this geometry settle over you, the way the pans are placed just so, each one doing its small part in the larger transformation from milk to cream to butter. You lift the candle and walk to the far corner where a fourth shelf holds no milk pans at all, but instead stores the empty pans that were cleaned and dried the day before. These are stacked upside down in columns of 3, their bottoms dusty and their interiors smelling faintly of the cold water from the trough. You will need some of these later when you pour off the skim milk and rinse the empty pans for the evening's milking, but for now, they simply wait, as patient as everything else in this room. You touch the topmost pan in one stack, feeling its dry, cool surface, and you note that it will need a quick rinse before use, because a small spider has spun a web between the rim and the wall. The web is so fine that it is almost invisible, and you brush it away gently with a finger, the silk breaking without resistance. Returning to the center of the room, you place the candle back on its stone ledge and look once more at the uncovered pans. 22 shallow dishes of milk and cream, arranged along 3 walls, cooled by spring water and earth, waiting for the skimmer in your hand. The water in the trough continues its endless trickle, the sound now as familiar as your own breathing. The first true light of dawn has begun to filter through the small windows, not yet strong enough to read by, but enough to cast a faint, watery illumination that mixes with the candlelight and turns the cream a softer shade of white. You can see now that a small moth has come in through some gap and sits on the rim of one pan, its wings folded into a pale triangle. You do not disturb it. It will find its way out when the door opens, or it will stay, another quiet presence in the cool dark. You take a deep breath of the cold air, letting it fill your lungs slowly, and you feel the readiness settle into your hands. The pans are arranged, the cream is risen, the light is growing almost imperceptibly, and the skimmer waits on its nail. The morning has moved from darkness into the first pale suggestion of day, and you have done nothing yet but look and arrange and breathe. But that has been enough. The work of skimming will begin soon, and it will take the time it takes, no more and no less, and you are in no hurry to start or to finish. For now, the pans rest in their order, and you rest alongside them. You turn away from the arranged pans and face the door where the skimmer hangs on its nail, a shape so familiar that your eyes find it without searching. The nail is a hand-forged spike driven deep into the stone mortar, and from it the skimmer hangs by a small loop of leather tied through a hole in the end of its wooden handle. You cross the Springhouse floor in 3 steps, the flat stones cool under your clogs, and you reach up to lift the tool from its resting place. The leather loop slips off the nail with a soft whisper, and the skimmer comes into your hand with the easy, balanced weight of something perfectly made for its work. You hold the skimmer in front of you, letting the candlelight play over its surfaces. The handle is turned from a piece of sugar maple, cut from a tree that grew on the south slope of the farm, and it is about 18 inches long from end to end. The wood has been smoothed by years of hands gripping it, and the grain is visible as fine, dark lines flowing along the length, curving slightly near the grip, where the maker followed the natural shape of the branch. The handle is not perfectly straight. It has a subtle bend 2/3 of the way down, a bend that fits into your right palm as if it were carved for you alone. The wood at the grip is darker than the rest, oiled by the skin of the women who held it before, and it has a warm, silky feel even in the cold air. Where the handle meets the skimming disc, a small brass ferrule holds the connection tight, its surface dulled to a soft brown patina. The skimming disc itself is made of tin, cut into a circle about 5 inches across and hammered slightly concave so that it forms a shallow bowl. The edges are rolled under in a smooth hem, leaving no sharp rim that might scratch the earthenware pans. Across the surface of the tin, small holes have been punched in a regular pattern, 3 concentric rings of perforations with a single hole at the very center. Each hole is about the diameter of a darning needle, cleanly punched from above so that the edges are slightly raised on the underside, and they are spaced evenly enough that the disc looks like a simple piece of geometry, a circle decorated with smaller circles. The tin has a soft grey-white sheen, and where you have held it over the years, a faint thumbprint of darker oxidation has formed near the edge, a mark that never washes off. You turn the skimmer over in your hand, looking at the underside, where the raised edges of the holes catch the light in tiny glints. This side does the work, skimming the cream while letting the thin milk drain back through. You take the skimmer in your right hand, your fingers closing around the grip just behind the brass ferrule, your thumb resting along the slight curve. The tool feels light, far lighter than it looks, because the tin disc is thin and the maple handle is seasoned to dry weightlessness. The balance point lies exactly where your index finger wraps around the wood, so that the disc hovers at the far end without tipping up or down, as if it were floating. You give a small experimental motion, tilting the disc from side to side, and the tin catches the candle flame in a brief flash before settling back into its subdued sheen. The skimmer is ready, and so are you, in the unspoken way that hands and tools come to agreement after long acquaintance. You carry the skimmer to the first pan on the lowest shelf, the one directly above the trough where the cream is thickest. The pan sits at a comfortable height, just below your waist, so that you can look down into it without stooping. The cream on this pan has set firmly, a solid white layer that looks almost like fresh snow before the sun touches it, and the milk below is a pale bluish-white, visible only as a deeper shadow beneath the cream. You take the muslin cloth you had earlier laid back from the pan and fold it a second time, tucking it into the basket, leaving the surface completely open to your work. You lower the skimmer very slowly, the disc descending toward the cream at a slight angle, the far edge making contact first. The moment the tin touches the cream, you feel a tiny resistance, a delicate give, as if the cream is a thin skin stretched over something deeper. You stop pressing downward and let the disc float on the surface for a moment, the cream supporting it like thick oil. The small holes in the tin fill immediately with cream, which stands in little rounded droplets above each perforation, and you tilt the handle just enough to let the far edge sink a fraction lower. The disc breaks through the cream layer with a soft, almost soundless parting, and then it is skimming. You draw the skimmer across the pan in one long, smooth motion, pulling it from the far rim toward yourself. The cream curls ahead of the tin like a gentle wave, a thick white ridge that folds over itself as it moves, collecting into a soft mass. The tin disc glides just under the cream layer, its concave shape lifting the cream upward while the thin milk drains away through the holes with a faint pattering sound, like the lightest rain on a leaf. You watch the cream gather on the upper surface of the skimmer, piling into a loose, fluffy heap that trembles slightly with the motion. Your wrist stays firm but not tight, guiding the handle with a steadiness that comes from muscle memory, and your left hand hovers near the edge of the pan, ready to catch any drip but never needing to. The skimmer reaches your side of the pan, and you lift it gently, tilting the disc so that the captured cream slides to one side and holds its shape. A soft white mound balanced on the tin. You carry the loaded skimmer to the crock that waits on the floor, stepping carefully so as not to jar the cream loose, and you tip the disc over the wide mouth. The cream falls away with a slow, heavy plop, dropping into the crock with a sound that is both soft and deep. A small bass note in the high treble of the dripping water. You pause to look at the deposit, the first cream of the morning settling into a smooth layer on the bottom of the stoneware vessel, its surface rounding slightly against the sides. The color of the cream in the crock is ivory, with a faint golden undertone that you can only see when it gathers in thickness, and it smells clean and sweet, carrying a hint of the cold spring air that has been its companion all night. You scrape the underside of the skimmer gently against the rim of the crock to catch the last clinging bit, then turn back to the pan. The pan now shows the result of your first pass, a swath of bare milk where the cream has been lifted away, the pale blue-white surface of the skim milk reflecting the candlelight in a different way than the cream did, shinier somehow, thinner. Around the edges of the swath, the remaining cream still floats in unbroken patches near the rim, and you will need 2 more passes to clear the pan completely. You lower the skimmer again, this time at a different angle, catching the cream along the left side of the pan and drawing it toward the center. The motion is slightly different from the first pass, more of a curving sweep that follows the contour of the earthenware, and the sound is different too. A softer, slower gathering because there is less cream to lift. The skimmer fills a second time, and you carry it to the crock, the plop this time landing on top of the first deposit, the cream building upwards slowly. The third pass cleans the pan entirely, a quick scrape around the far rim that catches the last thin patches, and then the milk beneath is bare, a smooth, pale disc of skim milk that looks cool and still. You lift the now empty pan from the shelf, tilting it to examine the surface, and you see no stray flecks of cream remaining. Only the faint track of the skimmer's edge, inscribed as a thin, transparent trail that fades even as you watch. Satisfied, you set the pan aside on a different shelf, where the empty pans will wait for rinsing, and you turn to the second pan. The second pan sits beside the first, its cream equally thick but with a slightly different texture. The milk from the evening milking came from different cows, some Jerseys with their rich golden milk and some Devons with milk that is whiter, and the cream on this pan has a deeper ivory color, a little firmer near the center where the milk cooled fastest. You lower the skimmer, and the disc meets a cream that resists just slightly more, the tin needing a firmer pressure to break through. You adjust your grip without thinking, your fingers shifting a 1/4 inch down the handle, and you draw the skimmer across with a motion that matches the cream's resistance, slower and more deliberate. The cream gathers ahead of the disc in a thicker ridge, folding into a heap that feels heavier on the skimmer when you lift it, and the thin milk drains through the holes in longer, slower drips. You carry the load to the crock, and the cream drops with a deeper sound, building the layer higher. You repeat the passes, 3 for this pan as well, and then you stop to stretch your fingers. The cold has begun to settle into the joints of your hands, a familiar dull ache that you ignore because it will pass as the work warms your blood. You flex your fingers open and closed a few times, feeling the small pops in your knuckles, and then you pick up the skimmer again. The handle now feels slightly warmer where your hand has been holding it, a small pocket of heat in the cold maple, and you notice this absent-mindedly as you move to the third pan. The third pan is one of the older ones, with a network of fine cracks in the glaze, and the cream has settled into those cracks slightly, making thin lines of deeper yellow visible at the surface. The skimmer catches these lines and gathers them into the mass, and you watch the cream fold over itself, the yellow streaks disappearing into the white, like thin honey stirred into fresh butter. The motion here is slower again, because the slightly roughened surface of the old pan holds the cream a little tighter, and you have to angle the skimmer more steeply to lift the cream cleanly without scraping the glaze. You feel the difference through the handle, a faint vibration transmitted up the maple, a texture that your fingers translate into information about the pan's condition and the cream's readiness. Pan by pan, you move along the lowest shelf, and each skimming is slightly different from the last, varying not because you intend variation, but because no two pans are exactly alike. Some pans release their cream in a single thick sheet that peels back from the milk like a blanket, while others yield thinner cream that breaks into soft clumps and requires more passes. Some pans have a cream that is perfectly smooth, and the skimmer glides through with an almost liquid silence. Others have a cream that is lightly dimpled, where the muslin cloth rested on it overnight, and the skimmer makes a tiny, rhythmic whisper as it moves over the slight ridges. You do not consciously note these differences. They register in your hands and in your ears as part of the continuous fabric of the work, each variation a thread in a larger pattern. The skimmer itself changes as you use it. The tin disc, cooled by the Springhouse air, grows colder still when it touches the chilled cream, and by the fourth pan it feels almost icy against your touch when you accidentally brush the edge with your free hand. The holes stay clear because the cream is thick enough not to clog them, and the thin milk drains through quickly, leaving the disc ready for the next pass. A small buildup of cream fat begins to accumulate around the rolled hem, a soft pale residue that you wipe away every few pans with a quick swipe of your thumb, wiping the thumb then against your apron. Your apron, a heavy linen that wraps around your waist, is already marked with small smudges of cream and water, and by the end of the morning it will be thoroughly damp and streaked with white. You pause when the lowest shelf is done, 6 pans skimmed and emptied, their cream now resting in the crock. You carry the candle over to the trough and dip a corner of the clean cloth into the cold spring water. Then wipe the skimmer disc gently, removing the residue of cream fat so that it will not sour on the metal. The water is so cold that it numbs your fingertips for a moment, and you shake your hand out before drying the disc on a dry portion of the cloth. The tin gleams faintly after the wipe, and you hold it up to the candle, checking that all the holes are clear. One perforation near the edge has a tiny droplet of water clinging to it, and you blow it away with a soft breath, watching the droplets scatter into mist. Now you turn to the second shelf, the one on the west wall with its 8 pans. These pans sit a little higher, and you have to lift your elbow slightly to bring the skimmer to the correct angle. The cream on this shelf is a bit softer, as you had noted earlier, and the skimmer must move more gently, with a lighter touch that lets the disc find its own depth rather than pressing through. You lower the skimmer onto the first pan with a feather-light touch, letting the disc rest on the surface until it just barely breaks through, and then you draw it across with a motion that is almost a suggestion, a slow glide that gathers the cream without disturbing the milk below. The sound is quieter here, a gentle shush rather than a pattering, and the cream mounds on the skimmer in a looser, airier heap that trembles as you carry it to the crock. The handle has warmed now to the temperature of your palm, and it no longer feels like a separate object, but like an extension of your arm, a wooden continuation of your own reach. You can close your eyes and still know exactly where the disc is in relation to the pan, how deep it sits, how much cream it holds. This knowledge is not conscious. It lives in your wrist and your elbow and your shoulder, in the small adjustments your body makes without consulting your mind. You have skimmed cream since you were tall enough to see over the shelf, and the tool has shaped your hand as much as your hand has shaped the tool, the two fitting together in a symmetry of use and wear. You finish the second shelf, 8 pans this time, and the crock is now nearly a quarter full. The cream inside has begun to form a deeper layer, and when you add a new load, it lands with a softer sound, muffled by the cream already there. You stop to look at the crock for a moment, noting the way the cream builds in horizontal layers, each new addition settling onto the previous one with a slight ridge visible at the edge. If you were to cut a slice through the crock, you would see the strata of the morning's work, each pan represented by a thin band of white, like the rings of a tree recording the slow passing of time. The thought does not form in words, but you feel a quiet satisfaction in the weight of the crock, which is now heavy enough that you cannot easily shift it with one hand. The remaining pans on the south wall wait for you, 8 more, and you move to them without haste, the skimmer still in your right hand, your left hand now carrying the candle. The light through the windows has grown stronger, the pearly grey of early dawn giving way to a pale gold that catches the edges of the pans and glints off the skimmer's tin surface. The candle is no longer strictly necessary, but you keep it burning because its warm flame adds a companionable glow to the increasing daylight, and because extinguishing it would feel like ending a part of the morning too soon. You set the candle on a new stone ledge near the south shelf and resume your work. The southern pans hold cream that is perhaps the most beautiful of the morning, a cream with a slight golden cast, because these pans receive the milk from the Jersey cows, whose milk carries more butterfat and a deeper color from the carotene in the fresh grass. The skimmer sinks into this cream with a feel that is almost velvety, the tin gliding through a substance that is denser and smoother, and the cream mounds up in thick, glossy folds that hold their shape longer on the disc. The thin milk beneath is visibly richer, a deeper blue-white that hints at the butter that will come from the cream later in the day. You take your time with these pans, letting the skimmer move slowly, letting your eyes rest on the quiet transformation of each pale circle from cream-covered to bare and glistening. Your hand has found a rhythm now, a steady pace that is neither fast nor slow, but perfectly matched to the work. The lift and lower, the draw and carry, the tilt and drop, these motions repeat in a cycle that takes about a minute per pass, 3 passes per pan, 22 pans in all, and your body settles into the routine as a horse settles into a familiar walk. Your breathing slows to match the rhythm deep and even, and the cool air moves in and out of your lungs with the same steady measure. The Springhouse, with its dripping water and its soft light and its calm chill, holds you in a pocket of stillness, and the morning passes without your noticing its passage. When the last pan is skimmed, you stand for a moment with the skimmer still in your hand, looking at the row of bare milk pans on the shelf. Their surfaces are all smooth and pale blue now, each one a small mirror reflecting the window light in a slightly different direction. You wipe the skimmer one final time with the damp cloth, cleaning the disc and the ferrule and the grip, and then you carry it back to its nail beside the door. The leather loop slips over the nail with a small definitive click, and the skimmer hangs there once more, its work done for the morning, its tin disc still gleaming with a faint film of moisture that will dry in the cool air. You flex your hand open and closed, feeling the warmth that the work has brought into your fingers, and you turn to lift the heavy crock of cream from the floor, ready to carry it to the farmhouse. But that is another part of the day, and for now you simply stand, breathing the cold spring air, your hand still shaped to the memory of the handle's grit. You stand still in the center of the Springhouse after the skimmer has been hung back on its nail, and the quiet of the room rises up around you like water rising in a pool. The sound of your own breathing is the first thing you notice, a slow and steady rhythm that has been there all along but was hidden under the small noises of skimming. Now that the work is finished, your breath becomes audible to you. A soft tide of air moving in and out, the exhale slightly warmer than the inhale, because the air you breathe out carries the heat of your body into the cold space. You can see the faint mist of your breath when you turn toward the candle, a tiny cloud that forms and dissolves with each exhale, and you watch it for a few cycles without thinking, just observing the way it blooms and vanishes. The water in the trough has been running all morning, and now it becomes the dominant voice in the Springhouse, a sound so constant that you have stopped hearing it unless you choose to. You choose to now, letting your attention settle on the various threads that make up the water's song. The spring rises from a fissure in the bedrock and spills into a stone catch basin, and that first emergence makes a low, gulping sound, a deep note that comes from somewhere under the floor, as if the earth itself was swallowing slowly. From the basin the water overflows through a narrow channel cut into the lip of the stone, and here the sound changes to a bright, glassy trickle, a thin sheet of water, pouring over the edge and into the trough that runs the length of the wall. The trough is carved from a single long block of granite, and the water sliding along its bottom makes a soft hiss, the sound of liquid moving over slightly rough stone with a faint friction that creates tiny bubbles. At the far end of the trough, where the water reaches the low point and spills out through a wooden spout, the sound shifts again to a series of distinct drops, each one forming and falling with a small hollow plink, then another, never in a predictable rhythm but always with the same note, a clear E-flat that you once hummed along with until you realized you were doing it. You step closer to the trough and kneel down, bringing your ear nearer to the water. The cold radiating from the stone trough presses against your cheeks, and the sound of the moving water becomes richer when you are close, revealing layers you cannot hear from standing. There is a faint gurgle where the water curls around a small pebble lodged in the channel, a tiny turbulence that creates a low, continuous murmur. Beneath that, you hear the drip of condensation falling from the underside of the shelf above the trough, where the cold water has chilled the wood so much that moisture from the air collects and drips back down every few seconds. Each drop hits the surface of the trough water with a delicate tap, like a fingernail on glass, and sends a ring of ripples outward that fade within an inch. You stay there, kneeling, letting the water sounds fill your ears until they seem to fill your whole head. A cool, liquid music that has no beginning and no end. The wooden shelves, which held the weight of the milk pans all night, are settling now that the pans have been lifted away, and they speak in their own voice. The pine planks expand and contract with the changes in temperature and humidity, and as the morning warms the outside air by a degree or two, the wood adjusts itself with a series of soft creaks and ticks. These sounds are slow and widely spaced. A single quiet groan from the west shelf, then a minute of silence, then a sharper click from the north shelf, as if the wood were recounting the memory of the weight it bore. You listen to these creaks without moving, and you notice that they often come in pairs, a brief rising sound followed by a longer, settling sound, the plank finding its new shape and then resting. The stone corbels that support the shelves make no sound at all, but you imagine you can hear the pressure they exert, a deep, silent holding that you feel rather than hear, a steadiness that anchors the room. The candle on its stone ledge adds its own small voice to the company of sounds. The flame burns with a nearly silent hiss, a sound so faint that you must stand very close to detect it, a whisper of wax vaporizing at the wick's tip. Occasionally the wick will crackle, a tiny bright pop that sends a single spark upward into the dark, and the flame jumps for a fraction of a second before steadying again. The melted wax around the wick makes a soft, liquid sound as it pools, a sound like a drop of heavy cream falling into a crock, but higher in pitch, more delicate. When a small channel opens in the wax rim and a stream of liquid wax flows down the side of the candle stub, it cools and hardens almost instantly with a faint crackling noise, like the sound of a thin sheet of ice forming on a puddle. You watch the flame through half-closed eyes, and the tiny sounds it makes seem to measure time in a different way than the water does, more fitful and more brief. Your own movements, now that you are standing still, have faded to nothing, but the memory of them lingers in the air. The coarse linen of your apron brushes against your dress when you shift your weight, making a soft, sandy rustle that lasts only a moment. The wooden soles of your clogs scrape against the stone floor with a gritty sound when you turn, a sound that echoes slightly off the north wall before being absorbed. Your hands, when you rub them together for warmth, produce a dry, papery whisper, the skin of your palms moving over itself with a sound like fine sandpaper drawn lightly across a board. Even your swallowing, when you pause to moisten your throat, makes a small click deep inside your ears, a sound that only you can hear, and that vanishes as soon as it occurs. Beyond the stone walls, the outside world has begun its own slow awakening, and the sounds of the farm carry into the Springhouse through the small high windows and the gap under the door. The first clear sound you hear from outside is the crow of the rooster from the hen house up near the barn, a sound that starts as a low, rattling breath and then rises into a loud, hoarse call that breaks at the top and falls away into silence. The crow sounds 3 times with long pauses between, and then the rooster falls quiet, his duty for the moment discharged. After the rooster, the hens begin to murmur, a soft conversational clucking that blends into one continuous sound, like a dozen small stones rolling slowly down a slope. You cannot see the hens from inside the Springhouse, but you can picture them scratching in the dirt, their beaks making small pecking sounds that you cannot hear from this distance, but can imagine well enough. A cow lows from the pasture across the brook, a long mournful note that starts deep in her chest and rises to a higher pitch before fading. The sound carries well in the cool morning air, and it seems to hang in the hollow for a moment after the cow has stopped. A faint echo off the hillside that might be another cow answering, or might be just the first note returning. You recognize the voice as that of the old Jersey, the one with the crooked horn, and you know she lows like that when she has found a patch of clover and wants the others to join her. The other cows do not answer in voice, but you hear the soft thud of their hooves moving through the wet grass, a muffled, rhythmic sound that travels through the ground more than through the air, a vibration you feel through the soles of your clogs rather than hear with your ears. A door closes somewhere near the farmhouse, the sound flat and final, a heavy wooden door pushed shut with a firm hand. The sound rolls across the yard and reaches you a moment later, softened by distance and by the damp air of the hollow, so that it seems more like a suggestion of a closing door than the thing itself. You know without seeing that someone has stepped out of the farmhouse, perhaps your father going to the woodpile, or your mother heading to the garden, and their footsteps will soon follow, the slow crunch of boots on the gravel path that leads past the Springhouse. You listen for those footsteps, but they do not come your way. They turn toward the barn instead, and the crunch fades, replaced by the distant sound of a wooden bucket being set down on a stone wellhead. The birds in the trees above the Springhouse are waking fully now, and their songs weave through the other sounds in bright threads. A wood thrush calls from the big maple near the path, its song a series of clear, flutel-like notes that rise and fall in a pattern that seems almost like language, a question asked and answered, and asked again. The thrush pauses between each repetition, as if waiting for a reply, and sometimes a second thrush farther up the hollow answers with the same sequence of notes, but in a different key, a duet that carries on without hurry. A chickadee chimes in with its short, buzzing call, a sound like two small stones tapped together, and a crow calls once from far away, its voice a dry, harsh caw that contrasts with the sweetness of the smaller birds. All these songs overlap and separate and overlap again, creating a patternless weave that changes moment by moment, and you stand inside the Springhouse listening to it as if it were a single voice with many throats. The brook that runs beside the path adds its own note to the chorus outside, a higher, faster version of the water sound inside, because the brook runs more steeply downhill and tumbles over a series of small ledges. Each ledge creates a little waterfall no higher than your hand, and the water falling over it makes a rushing, splashing sound that is louder than the trough but less steady, rising and falling as the breeze shifts the direction of the sound. You can hear the brook best when you stand near the door, and you walk over to it now. Your steps slow and quiet on the stone floor, and you press your ear near the gap between the door and its frame. The brook sound rushes in, cold and clear, and with it comes the smell of watercress and wet earth, the scent of the hollow rising up as the sun touches the dew-soaked ground. The breeze itself has a sound, though it is the quietest of all the morning's voices. It moves through the leaves of the maple and the beech with a soft, rushing sigh, a sound like a distant ocean that never quite arrives, and it stirs the ferns growing on the bank above the Springhouse with a drier, rattling whisper. When the breeze finds the small gap under the Springhouse door, it makes a faint, hollow moan. The sound of air moving through a narrow space, and the candle flame flickers and bends, adding its own soft flutter to the noise. The breeze dies as quickly as it came, and the sounds of the trees and the ferns settle back into stillness, leaving only the steady voice of the brook and the birds. Inside the Springhouse, the water continues its endless work, the drops falling from the spout with the same measured plink, plink, plink that you have heard since before dawn. The shelves creak once more, a long, slow note from the north wall, and then fall silent. The candle hisses softly, the wax pool widening. You lean against the rough stone wall, feeling the cold seep through the wool of your shawl, and you close your eyes for a moment, allowing the sounds to blend into a single sceneless presence that has no name and no edges. The water and the birds, and the creaking wood, and the distant cow and your own slow breath become one thing, a steady hum of life that asks nothing of you at all. You remain like this for some time, not sleeping but not fully awake, suspended in the cool acoustic of the Springhouse. The light through the windows grows a little stronger, and the shadows shift a little shorter, but you do not move. Your hands have grown cool again from stillness, and you tuck them into the opposite sleeves of your dress, feeling the warmth of your own forearms. The candle has burned down to a stub, and the flame is now lower, the sound of its hissing fainter, and you know that soon it will gutter and go out. That will be its own small sound, a soft puff of smoke and the sudden silence where the hiss used to be, and you wait for it without expectation. When the candle does go out, the sound is exactly as you knew it would be, a brief wet sigh, and then nothing. The darkness in the room does not deepen, because the daylight is now strong enough to fill the space with a grey, shadowless light. But the absence of the candle's tiny voice leaves a gap in the tapestry of sound that your ear notices. The water fills the gap immediately, the dripping and trickling seeming louder now in the silence left behind, and you open your eyes. The room looks different without the warm yellow flame, all cool tones now, the pans on their shelves rendered in shades of grey and pale blue. The sounds continue, and you listen to them with fresh attention, hearing the morning as if for the first time. A new sound enters from outside as you stand there, the slow, rhythmic scrape of a scythe being sharpened somewhere up near the barn. It is a sound of metal on stone, a long, singing rasp that comes in regular strokes, pause, then another stroke, each one lasting about 2 seconds and followed by a breath of silence. The sound carries a long way in the still morning air, and you can hear the faint chime of the blade vibrating after each stroke, a high, tinny ring that fades slowly. The man sharpening the scythe is likely your brother, preparing to cut the lower pasture today, and the sound is a familiar one, part of the summer's rhythm. It does not disturb the quiet, but rather adds to it, another thread in the weave, a human sound that matches the steady pace of everything else. The sharpening stops after a time, and then you hear the scythe begin to swing. The sound of the blade cutting through grass is too far away to reach you clearly, but you can hear the soft, swishing rhythm of it, a whisper that repeats and repeats, the sound of stems parting and falling. It is a quieter sound than the sharpening, more distant, and soon the breeze shifts and carries it away, leaving only the birds and the brook and the water in the trough. You push yourself away from the wall at last, your body slow and heavy with the calm of the morning. The sounds of the Springhouse wrap around you as you move, the clogs scraping, the apron rustling, the floor stones gritting under your weight. You walk to the crock of cream that waits on the floor, its surface smooth and pale, and you bend to lift it, the motion making a soft grunt escape your lips, a sound that is small and quickly swallowed by the stone walls. The crock is heavy, and you brace it against your hip, the ceramic cool through your dress. As you carry it to the door, the water continues its plinking, the shelves their resting, the birds their calling, and the whole quiet world of the Springhouse hums on behind you. A song without end that will still be singing when you return at evening with the warm milk, ready to begin the cycle again. The 2 windows of the Springhouse are set into the stone walls high above the shelves. Small openings that were never meant to frame a view or flood the room with brightness, but only to let in enough of the outside to tell night from day. Each window is a simple rectangular void cut through the fieldstone, roughly 2 feet wide and no more than 18 inches high, with a deep inner sill formed by the thickness of the wall itself. The stones around each opening are slightly larger and more regular than the rest, chosen by the builder to form a flat lintel at the top and a smooth sill at the bottom. And they bear the chisel marks of someone who worked a century ago, fine parallel grooves that catch the light at certain angles. The glass panes are set into wooden frames that have warped a little with the decades of damp, so that the corners no longer meet perfectly, and a thin gap admits a thread of air, enough to flutter the candle flame but not enough to let in rain. The glass is crown glass, made by blowing a bubble of molten glass and spinning it into a flat disc. And each pane shows the faint concentric rings and the slight bullseye at the center where the Pontil rod was attached, a small, thick swirl that distorts whatever lies behind it in a gentle, swirling curve. When you first stepped into the Springhouse before dawn, the windows were nothing but dark shapes on the walls, rectangles of a slightly thinner darkness that you sensed rather than saw. The stone around them was black, the glass was black, and the world outside had not yet begun to separate from the night. You could tell where the windows were only by the way the absolute black of the stone gave way to a faint, almost imperceptible coolness in the darkness, as if the glass held a suggestion of the open air beyond. The candle flame, at that hour, reflected back from the panes in two small orange points, one in each window, and these twin reflections were the only sign that the glass existed at all. Two tiny fires floating in the void. As you moved about the room, the reflections shifted and sometimes vanished, reappearing when you stood in just the right place to catch them, and they seemed like distant stars, cold and still. The first change came so slowly that you did not witness it happen, but only realized at some point during the arrangement of the pans that the windows had become visible as shapes. The glass had turned from black to a deep, colorless gray, the gray of still water under a clouded sky, and the wooden frames now showed as darker lines dividing each window into 6 small panes. The stone wall around them, which had been invisible, now appeared as a rough surface of lighter and darker blocks, and the chisel marks on the lintel stone were just barely suggested, like writing you could almost read. This was the light of the earliest dawn, the light that comes when the sun is still far below the horizon, but the sky has begun to glow, and it filled the Springhouse with a soft, directionless illumination that made no shadows at all. You moved through this grey light without thinking about it, your hands finding the cloths and the pans and the windows, simply watched, their glass still flat and reflective. Then, as you were skimming the first pans on the lowest shelf, a change touched the light so slightly that your eyes registered it before your mind did. The grey in the windows began to warm, not into color yet, but into a softer tone, as if the grey had been mixed with a drop of milk. The glass caught this new light and held it, the panes glowing faintly, and you looked up to see that the eastern sky outside had lightened into a band of pale pearl above the ridge. The trees on the hillside, which had been a solid mass of black, now showed individual shapes, the round crown of a maple, distinct from the pointed crown of a hemlock, and the mist in the hollow had brightened into a white blanket that reflected the sky. The Springhouse interior responded to this change, the deepest shadows under the shelves retreating a little, the surfaces of the stone floor becoming visible as individual slabs rather than a single dark plane, and you paused in your work for a moment to watch the slow emergence of the world. The beam of direct sunlight, when it finally arrived, came not as a sudden shaft, but as a gradual warming of one particular spot on the east wall, just below the window. The sun had cleared the ridge, and its first rays, still nearly horizontal, found the gap in the trees and the small opening of the window, entering the Springhouse at a low angle that stretched the light into a long, pale parallelogram on the rough stone. You noticed it first as a change in the texture of the wall, a patch of stone that seemed smoother and lighter than the rest, and then you saw the faint rainbow edge where the glass had split the white light into a narrow spectrum, a sliver of red and blue that ran along the top of the patch. The parallelogram moved so slowly that it seemed still, but if you looked away and then looked back, you could tell that it had crept a little farther down the wall, a little closer to the shelf, its progress as quiet and patient as the cream rising in the pans. The dust motes became visible then, suspended in the beam of light like tiny fish in a clear stream. You had not seen them before, had not known they were there, but the sunlight revealed them, thousands of minuscule particles floating in the still air of the Springhouse, each one a point of brightness that drifted and turned without any discernible direction. Some moved upward very slowly, caught in a faint current of warm air rising from the sun-warmed stone. Others fell just as slowly, descending grain by grain toward the floor. Most simply hovered, turning in place, their motion so small that it seemed like stillness. You stood with the skimmer in your hand and watched them, the dust motes catching the light and releasing it, a whole invisible world of floating specks that had been there all along, that had been with you through the morning's work, that would be there when you left. The beam made a solid column of light through which they drifted, a column that was pale gold near the window and paler gold near the wall, and at its edges it softened into the general grey of the room, so that the dust motes seemed to appear out of nothing and vanish back into nothing as they crossed the boundary. The cream in the pans caught this growing light and held it differently than the stone or the wood or the water. The surface of the cream was smooth enough to reflect, and from certain angles you could see a muted image of the window squares on the pale white skin, a darker rectangle floating on the cream with its mullions faintly visible as thin lines. The reflection was not sharp like a mirror, It was soft and blurred, the edges bleeding into the cream's own whiteness as if the window were underwater. When you moved your head, the reflection moved with you, sliding across the cream's surface, and when you bent to skim, the reflection disappeared entirely, replaced by the wet gleam of the skim milk beneath. The milk, once the cream was lifted, reflected the window in a different way, brighter and sharper, because the skim milk was thinner and more transparent, its surface like polished pewter. The empty pans, rinsed and stacked, showed no reflection at all, only a dull, damp sheen that absorbed the light without returning it. The two windows, though they were the same size and shape, did not receive the same light, because one faced more to the east and caught the full sunrise, while the other, set on the south wall, received only the indirect glow of the morning sky. The east window grew bright first, its panes shining like pale fire, and it cast a distinct shadow of its frame onto the opposite wall, a shadow that was as sharp as the light allowed, with the crossbars of the mullions clearly drawn in dark grey. The south window stayed softer, its light more diffused, and it cast no shadow of its own, but instead contributed a gentle, ambient glow that filled the middle of the room and kept the shelves from falling back into complete darkness. As the sun climbed higher, the east window's light shifted from yellow gold to a whiter tone, and the shadow of its frame on the wall crept downward and to the left, shortening and shrinking until it lost its sharpness and dissolved into the general brightness of the morning. The shadows of the pans themselves moved too, though so slowly that you could only track them by remembering where they had been minutes before. When you set the first pans on the lower shelf before dawn, their shadows were non-existent, the room too dark for any shadow to form. With the arrival of the grey dawn light, each pan developed a faint, diffuse shadow on the plank beneath it, a soft dark circle that matched the pan's bottom exactly. When the direct sunbeam entered, the shadows grew darker and acquired edges, and they stretched sideways along the shelf, the pans on the east end casting long ellipses that reached toward the pans on the west end, overlapping them slightly. You watched one particular pan's shadow as you rested between skimmings, a pan near the end of the south shelf that the sunlight touched directly, and you saw the shadow lengthen and grow thinner, becoming a stretched oval that no longer matched the pan's round bottom, but instead looked like the shadow of some different object, a bowl perhaps, or a shallow dish seen from the side. The shadow crept across the grain of the pine plank, finding each saw mark and each small knot, and it moved with an oiliness that seemed alive, though it was only the earth turning in its slow, indifferent way. The color of the light changed as the morning progressed, passing through a sequence of subtle tints that you could name if you thought about them, but mostly you simply received them as the atmosphere of the room. The first true daylight was a cool, silvery white, like the light reflected off new snow, and it made the cream look very white, and the stone walls look grey, and the water in the trough look almost black. Then, as the sun rose above the tree line, the light took on a pale gold that warmed the earthenware of the pans and brought out the amber tones in the pine shelves, so that the whole room seemed to shift from winter to early spring in the space of 20 minutes. Later still, when the sun was well up but still shining obliquely through the east window, the light became a clear, butter yellow that pooled on the floor stones and climbed the west wall, making the moss on the damp stones glow a vivid green that startled you for a moment because you had forgotten there was green in this grey place. These transitions were so gradual that you never caught the moment of change. You only looked up and recognized that the room had become a different room than the one you were standing in a while ago. The light repainted over everything like a slow wash of watercolor. The wavy glass in the windows contributed its own small distortions to the light, bending and fragmenting the sunbeam so that the pool of light on the floor had soft, undulating edges instead of straight lines. Where the glass was thicker near the bullseye center, the light was slightly dimmer and greener, a faint celadon tint that came from iron impurities in the sand the glassmaker had used. Where the glass was thinner near the edges, the light was brighter and more yellow, and it formed ripples on the stone floor that moved slightly when the breeze outside shifted the branches and flickered the light. These ripples were like the patterns of light on the bottom of a shallow stream, a shifting net of brightness and shadow that played over the same few stones, never repeating, never still, and you found yourself watching them for a long moment, your breathing slow, the skimmer forgotten in your hand. The dust motes in the sunbeam had their own color too, a warm honeyed sparkle that came from the sunlight itself. Each mote, seen up close, was just a pale fleck of something, a fragment of dried leaf, a tiny fibre from your wool shawl, a grain of soil tracked in on your clogs, but in the beam they all became points of gold, a constellation of drifting stars that moved in slow, silent choreography. When you passed your hand through the beam, the motes swirled and scattered, filling the space your hand had vacated with a brief turbulent cloud that settled almost immediately back into its slow drift. You did this once, just to see the motion, and the displaced dust motes took a few seconds to find their places again, some rising, some falling, some continuing their sideways drift, as if nothing had happened. The light, for all its changes, never became harsh or bright inside the Springhouse. The small size of the windows, the depth of the stone walls, the damp, shadowy nature of the place all worked together to keep the illumination subdued, a quiet light that rested on surfaces rather than striking them. Even at noon, when the sun would be nearly overhead and the outside world would be blazing in the full heat of a July day, the Springhouse would remain in a greenish half-dusk, lit mostly by the indirect glow from the two small openings and by the cool light reflecting up from the water in the trough. You knew this from 100 other mornings, and you took comfort in the knowledge that the milk and the cream would stay cool and protected from the sun's direct heat, their surfaces never warming beyond the temperature of the spring. The windows were exactly sufficient, no more, and their modesty was a virtue. As you prepared to carry the cream crock to the farmhouse, you took one last look at the windows. The east window now held a square of pale blue sky with a single branch of maple leaves visible in its lower corner, the leaves still and dark against the bright background. The south window was darker, showing only the deep green of the fern bank and the shadowed trunk of a beech tree. The parallelogram of sunlight that had been moving across the wall all morning had finally reached the edge of the shelf and was now climbing the side of the rinsed pans you had stacked there, making the wet earthenware gleam in a diagonal stripe. The dust motes still drifted in the beam, as they had been doing since the sun first found them, and they would continue to drift long after you left, dancing their slow, weightless dance for an audience of stone and water. You lifted the crock and turned toward the door, and the light of the windows fell across your back, warm through your shawl, a gentle pressure that felt like the morning's hand on your shoulder before you stepped out into the full, bright day. You stand beside the crock now, the skimmer hung once more on its nail and the rinsed pans draining on their shelf, and you allow your full attention to settle on the cream itself. The cream fills the heavy stoneware vessel to a depth of perhaps 6 inches, a soft, pale mass that glows faintly in the muted window light. It has no sharp edges, no defined shape other than the round contour of the crock's interior, and its surface is slightly domed where the last additions of cream fell from the skimmer and settled on the top. The surface is smooth, but not perfectly flat. It holds the memory of the skimming in gentle swells and shallow depressions, like the surface of a lake after the wind has died, the water still holding the ghost of the waves. This is the cream itself, separate now from the milk that carried it, the culmination of the night's slow rising and the morning's steady work. The color of the cream is what you notice first when you give it your full gaze. It is white, but not a single white, not the flat white of a washed sheet or the sharp white of snow under direct sun. It is an ivory white, deep and layered, with the faintest undertone of warm yellow that seems to rise from within rather than sitting on the surface. This yellow is so subtle that you cannot see it when you look directly at the cream. You see it instead at the edges of your vision, a creamy golden blush that recalls the buttercups in the pasture where the cows grazed last week. The color comes from the carotene in the fresh summer grass, a pigment that passes through the cow and into the milk fat, and it is the sign of milk taken from cows on good green feed rather than dry hay. You have seen winter cream that is pale and nearly blue in its whiteness, and you know the difference without having to name it. This summer cream is richer in every way, richer in color and richer in substance. The surface of the cream, when you lean close, is not as featureless as it first appears. A few tiny bubbles, no larger than the head of a pin, are caught just under the top skin, trapped there when the cream fell into the crock and folded over on itself. They are perfectly round and perfectly still, and they catch the window light in minute, silvery glints that wink at you as you tilt your head. The skin of the cream has a fine, almost invisible grain to it, a texture like the surface of very smooth paper or the inside of an eggshell. And when you breathe gently across it, the skin dimples slightly and then returns to its former smoothness, as if it were a resilient membrane. This top layer is very slightly thicker than the cream beneath, a faint crust that forms through contact with the cool air, and it has a duller sheen than the cream below, a matte finish that contrasts with the glossy interior. You lower a clean fingertip to the cream's surface, touching it with the lightest possible pressure. The cream is cool, of course, having been stored in the Springhouse all night and then skimmed into a crock that sat on the cold floor, but its coolness is different from the chill of stone or water. It is a round, soft coolness, a coolness that yields, and your fingertip dimples the surface without breaking it, creating a small depression that slowly fills in after you lift your finger away. The cream clings to your skin in a thin, velvety film, and when you rub your thumb across your fingertip, the film spreads into a smooth, silky layer that feels almost oily but without any greasiness. A clean, rich slip that soaks into your skin slowly. The sensation is so familiar that you rarely think about it. But now you let yourself notice it, the way the cream buffers your skin from the air. The way it carries a faint, sweet scent that you can only detect when your hand is close to your face. That scent is the next thing you contemplate. The cream smells cool, first of all, as if the chill of the Springhouse were embedded in its substance. Under the coolness is a clean dairy sweetness, the smell of fresh milk, but concentrated, richer, with a roundness that fills the nose without sharpness. There is no trace of sourness, not even the faintest edge. The cream is perfectly sweet and fresh, and it will stay so for another day or more if kept in the cold. You can detect, if you concentrate, a faint grassy note that echoes the yellow undertone of the color, a green, living hint of the pasture that has traveled all the way through the cow and into this quiet crock. The scent is not strong enough to fill the room. You have to lean close to the cream to catch it. But once you do, it stays in your awareness for a long time, a gentle presence at the edge of each breath. You step back from the crock to rest your hands on the edge of the shelf, and from this small distance the cream appears again as a unified mass, pale and still. The way it holds its shape is remarkable, and you consider this property with the slow appreciation of someone who works with cream every day and never quite loses the wonder of its nature. The cream is a liquid, certainly, one that you poured and skimmed and will soon churn into butter, but it is a liquid that behaves almost like a soft solid. It mounds up in the crock with a rounded peak where you scraped the last skimmer load onto the pile, and that peak shows no inclination to slump or level itself out. It stands as you left it, a small, soft mountain of white that holds its form against gravity. If you were to press your spoon into it, the cream would resist gently and then give way, and the hollow you made would remain, the sides of it standing firm and clean, not flowing back together. This quality of thickness, which you know well, is the reason cream can be skimmed at all. If it were thinner, it would mix back into the milk, and no amount of careful skimming could separate it. The thickness of cream is not a single quality, but a spectrum that you have come to understand through your hands and your eyes. The cream from the coldest pans, those nearest the trough, is noticeably firmer, its texture approaching that of soft butter, and it holds its shape on the skimmer in a solid, rounded mound that barely trembles as you carry it. The cream from the warmer pans is softer and looser, and it mounds up in a more relaxed heap, the edges of it rounding off more quickly and the surface settling into a flatter plane after a few moments. Both creams are now mixed together in the crock, the firmer layers from the early pans interleaved with the softer layers from the later pans, and the result is a cream that has a moderate, even texture, thick enough to heap but soft enough to pour slowly if the crock were tipped. You know that when the butter churning begins later in the day, this cream will yield a golden butter with a slight crumbly texture, the mark of good summer pasture and cool storage. You find yourself thinking back to the single pan you noticed most this morning, the old earthenware pan with a network of fine cracks in its glaze. And you recall the exact way the cream looked when you first uncovered it. The cream had risen to a depth just over 3/4 of an inch, an excellent thickness for this time of year, and its surface was so smooth and unbroken that it reflected the muslin's faint grid of threads as a ghostly, regular pattern. The color in that pan was evenly pale, but right near the rim, where the slightest warming had occurred, The cream was minutely thinner and showed a translucent edge that graded into the deeper opacity at the center. When you brought the skimmer down to begin, the very tip of the tin disc made first contact directly in the middle of the pan, and the cream dimpled there in a sharp, neat ring that traveled outward for a fraction of an inch before disappearing. The resistance you felt was like pressing a spoon into cold honey, a brief, elastic pushback that gave way all at once, and the tin disc broke through the cream layer with a sound that was less a noise and more a sensation. A soft, wet parting transmitted up the wooden handle and into the bones of your hand. As the skimmer moved forward, the cream ahead of it rose up into a low, curling wave that was not a single fold but a series of tiny, overlapping pleats, each one no wider than a blade of grass, and these pleats gathered into the hollow of the disc as the cream surrendered itself to the motion. The color of the cream intensified where it bunched up, the pale ivory deepening into a richer, warmer tone, the same way a white cloud appears brighter at its thickest center. The wave crested and broke gently over its own base, folding the cream onto itself, and you saw the underside of the fold for a brief moment, a surface that had been hidden from the air, glossy and wet and a shade paler than the exposed top. That underside vanished immediately into the fresh mass accumulating on the skimmer, and the process repeated itself in a steady, flowing continuity as the disc traveled across the pan. The sound of the cream moving, for it did make a sound, a very quiet one, was a soft, thick shush, the sound of a viscous liquid being pushed aside with patience. It was different from the sound of water, which rushes and splashes, and different from the sound of milk, which sloshes thinly. Cream speaks in a low, unhurried murmur, a sound of weight and richness, and it seemed to you as if the cream were protesting just a little at being disturbed. A gentle, reluctant noise that had no complaint in it. As the skimmer reached the far rim and you began to lift, the sound changed to a slightly higher, thinner note, the sound of the last connections, stretching and then snapping, the cream leaving its companion of 12 hours, the skim milk, with a tiny, adhesive sigh. On the skimmer, the captured cream sat in a mound that was both firm and delicate, holding its shape, but trembling very slightly with the tremor of your hand. You could see the concentric rings of the tin disc's holes imprinted on the underside of the cream, a faint pattern of small dots that faded as the cream settled and the tiny perforations released their grip. The mound had a gloss to it that the flat surface in the pan lacked, a wet, satiny shine that caught the candlelight in a single curved highlight running along its crest. That highlight followed the contour of the mound like a thin line of liquid silver, moving as you moved, slipping down the side of the heap as you tilted the skimmer toward the crock. When you tipped the disc and the cream fell away, it did not pour or splash. It let go all at once in a single cohesive mass that landed with a soft, definitive plop, a sound that was muffled and deep, like a stone dropping into very thick mud. The mound and the crock shivered for a second after the addition, then settled into stillness, its new layer merging imperceptibly with the layer below. After the cream was lifted, you glanced back at the pan and saw the trail it had left behind. The skim milk now exposed to the air. The surface of the skim milk was not white like the cream, but a pale, translucent blue, the color of whey or of very thin, non-fat milk, and it reflected the candle flame with a sharper, brighter glint than the cream had done. Across this pale surface ran the track of the skimmer, a satiny line where the last faint film of cream had been disturbed, but not quite lifted, a trail that was slightly whiter than the milk around it, smooth and sinuous, recording exactly the path your hand had taken. That trail lasted only a few moments before the still liquid began to erase it, the thin film of remaining cream fat slowly spreading back into uniformity, but for those moments you could read the morning's work written on the pan, like a signature. Then the trail faded, the skim milk became an even, featureless disc of pale blue, and the cream that had once crowned it was gone, added to the collective richness in the crock. Now, standing over that crock, you can imagine the layers of cream from all 22 pans, resting one above the other, each one slightly different in color and texture, a patient archive of the morning's labor. The bottommost layer is from the first pan you skimmed, and it has had the most time to settle, its surface now compressed by the weight of the later additions, its texture perhaps a little denser. The topmost layer is from the last pan, and it still holds its soft peaks and its glossy highlights, as fresh as the moment it left the skimmer. Between them are 20 other strata, each one a thin band of ivory that carries the particular memory of the pan it came from. The slightly golden cream from the Jersey milk, the firmer cream from the trough shelf, the softer cream from the upper pans. All of them now rest together in the quiet dark of the crock, indistinguishable from one another, unless you were to slice a section through the whole mass, which you will never do, and the thought of this invisible layering pleases you in a way you cannot put into words. You dip your finger into the crock one more time, this time breaking the surface and scooping up a small dollop of cream. The cream sits on your finger with the same soft weight you have always known, and you lift it to the light, turning your hand slowly to see how it behaves. The cream is opaque even in a thin layer, its whiteness completely hiding your skin beneath, and at the edges where the cream is thinnest, it shows a faint translucency that is more white than clear, like a thin slice of ivory held to the sun. The dollop holds its shape on your finger, standing up in a small rounded peak that does not slump, and when you tilt your finger downward, the cream stretches very slightly before releasing and dropping back into the crock with a soft, wet sound. The spot on your finger where the cream had been is left coated in a thin, glossy film that you wipe absently on your apron, where it will join the other smudges and traces of the morning. A record of contact between skin and cream, hand and harvest. The cream asks nothing more of you now. It will rest here in the cool until the butter churn is ready, and then it will undergo another transformation, from soft pale cream to firm golden butter, with buttermilk drained away and salt worked into the crumbly mass. That is later, hours from now, and in this moment the cream is complete, perfect in itself, a substance that has required only patience and coolness, and the steady drawing of a tin disc across its surface. You cover the crock loosely with a clean muslin cloth, tucking the edges under the rim so that the cloth does not touch the cream surface, and you leave it there on the cool floor, the water trickling beside it, the light falling softly across its cloth lid. The cream sleeps, and you step back, letting the quiet resume its slow governance of the Springhouse. The morning's work, now nothing more than a pale memory gathered in a stoneware vessel. You lift the iron latch and pull the Springhouse door open, stepping from the chilled stone interior into the cool shade of the hollow. The door swings outward with the same long, slow creak you have known since childhood, and the moment you cross the threshold, the air changes its character around you. Inside, the air was a still, dense cold that smelled of wet stone and milk. Out here, the air moves softly against your face and carries 100 smells that the Springhouse walls keep out. Wet earth and crushed ferns, the green scent of growing things, the faint sweetness of watercress from the rivulet, and underneath it, all the clean, thin smell of the mountain breeze that has traveled down from the high ridges and through the beech woods. The difference in temperature is not as sharp now as it was before dawn, because the morning has warmed the hollow by a few degrees, but you still feel the cool of the Springhouse clinging to your clothes and your skin, a private pocket of chill that will disperse slowly in the open air. You stand on the flat stone step just outside the door, a single slab of grey schist that has been worn into a shallow concavity by generations of feet. The stone is damp under your clogs, beaded with condensation from the mist that filled the hollow before dawn, and a small spiderweb stretches from the door frame to the rough jamb, its silk strung with tiny droplets that catch the light like a string of minute glass beads. The web is empty. The spider has retreated into a crack in the mortar, and you are careful not to disturb the threads as you close the door behind you. The door settles into its frame with a soft, solid thump, and then the only sounds are the brook and the birds and the faint rustle of leaves overhead. The Springhouse is built directly into the bank where the spring rises, and the ground around it stays wet all year long, nourishing a thick carpet of ferns that grow right up to the foundation stones. You step off the stone and onto the path, which is soft here, almost spongy underfoot, padded with years of fallen needles and the creeping roots of the ferns. The ferns are mostly lady ferns, their delicate fronds arching out from central crowns in bright green sprays that reach as high as your waist. Each frond is made of many small leaflets arranged in opposite pairs along a central stem, and the leaflets are so finely cut that they look almost like lace, a green lace that trembles in the lightest movement of air. The dew has not yet dried from the ferns, and every leaflet holds a tiny drop of water at its tip, a drop that bends the frond slightly with its weight, and that flashes like a small diamond when the sun finds it. You brush past a frond and the dew spills against your skirt in a cool, damp streak that will dry in time, but for now reminds you of the moisture that feeds this hollow. Above the ferns, the bank rises steeply for perhaps 12 feet, held in place by the roots of trees and the outcropping ledges of the same fieldstone that built the Springhouse walls. Moss covers the stones here in thick, velvety cushions, 3 different kinds that you have noticed over the years but never learned the names of. One is a deep, rich green that grows in dense tufts like tiny pillows, its leaves so small and crowded together that the surface looks fuzzy and soft. Another is a paler, grey-green moss that spreads in flat, overlapping scales like the feathers of a bird's breast, hugging the stone so tightly that it seems painted on. The third is a trailing moss that hangs down from the more vertical stones in thin, feathery strands of a deeper olive color, swaying slightly when the breeze stirs, so that the whole bank seems to breathe. You reach out and touch the nearest cushion of moss, and it is cool and damp and spongy, yielding under your finger with the softness of fine wool. When you lift your finger, the moss springs back slowly, leaving a tiny indent that will vanish within the hour. The trees that shade the hollow are old, older than the farmhouse, older perhaps than the memory of anyone living. The largest is a sugar maple that stands directly above the Springhouse, its trunk so wide that you could not circle it with both arms. The bark is dark grey and deeply furrowed, with long vertical plates that curl outward slightly at the edges, and in the crevices grow small patches of lichen in pale sage green and dusty orange, a pattern like an old map drawn on the wood. The maple's roots snake down the bank in thick, coiled cables, some of them exposed where the soil has washed away, and they grit the earth and the stones as firmly as the foundations of the Springhouse itself. The crown of the maple spreads wide above you, a great dome of 5-lobed leaves that are still a fresh, translucent green from the early summer growth. The sunlight filters through these leaves in a green-gold light, dappling the ground with shifting coins of brightness that move slowly as the branches stir. You look up into the canopy and see the leaves edge on, their shapes distinct against the pale blue sky, and you notice the winged seeds, the samaras, already formed in pairs, pale green and papery, waiting for the autumn winds that will spin them down to the earth. Beside the maple stands a beech, not quite as tall, but wider in its spread. Its trunk, a smooth, silver-grey column that catches the light and holds it in a soft glow. The beech bark is unlike any other trees, thin and tight and unbroken, and in the past, some visitor carved initials into it, a faint scar that has stretched and smoothed with the years until the letters are nearly illegible. You run your hand over the carving, feeling the slight ridge of the healed bark, and you wonder for a moment who made it. A boy or a girl long grown, perhaps even your own grandfather in his youth. The beech leaves are smaller than the maples, oval and pointed at the tip, with fine parallel veins that run from the center to the edges like the ribs of a tiny fan. They are a darker green than the maple leaves, and they are glossier, catching the light in a shimmer that runs across the crown in waves when the breeze moves. Among the leaves, you can see the spiky green husks of the beetnuts beginning to form, small and sharp and still soft, the nuts inside no larger than a grain of rice. Beyond the beech, the woods continue up the hollow, a mix of hemlock and birch, and a few tall white pines that tower above the other trees, with their trunks straight and bare for 30 feet before the first branches. The hemlocks are the darkest of the trees, their needles a deep, sober green that seems to absorb the light rather than reflect it, and their lower branches droop down in graceful, curtain-like sweeps that brush the ground. The birches are the lightest, their white bark peeling in thin, papery curls that rattle very faintly when the breeze moves them, a sound like the whisper of many small pages turning. You can see a pilated woodpecker hole in one of the birches, a large rectangular hollow chiseled deeply into the trunk, dark and still and likely empty now, though you remember the spring when a pair of wood ducks nested there, and the hollow rang with the high, piping calls of the ducklings. At your feet, the path that leads from the Springhouse down to the farmyard is narrow and worn, edged with stones that were placed long ago to keep the earth from washing away in heavy rain. The stones are covered with a dry, grey-green crust of lichen that crackles faintly when you step on a loose bit, and between the stones grow low plants that you know well but rarely name. The round, scalloped leaves of wild ginger, the small white stars of chickweed still in flower, the tall slender stalks of jewelweed with its orange blossoms not yet opened. The jewelweed leaves hold the dew in round beads that roll like mercury when you touch them, and you remember that the plant's crushed stems can soothe a nettle sting, though you have not needed that remedy since you were a child running barefoot through the lower pasture. The brook runs beside the path, only a few feet from the Springhouse door, a clear stream that rises from the same underground source that feeds the trough inside. Here in the open air, the water is louder and livelier, tumbling over a series of small stone ledges that stair-step down the hollow. The brook is no wider than your outstretched arms, and in most places it is shallow enough that you could wade across without wetting your knees. But it moves with a constant, purposeful energy, the water folding and unfolding over itself in endless clear ribbons. The stones of the stream bed are rounded and smooth, every color of the hillside, pale quartz that gleams white underwater, dark grey schist with a silvery sheen, warm brown sandstone streaked with iron, and occasionally a piece of red granite carried down from some far ridge. The water flowing over these stones makes them look softer than they are, their edges blurred by the movement and the light, and small bubbles trail behind the larger stones, strings of tiny air pearls that spin and rejoin the current. Where the brook widens into a small pool just below the Springhouse, the watercress grows thickly, its leaves green and round and glossy, trailing long white roots into the cold water. The cress is lush and fresh, and you can smell its sharp, peppery scent as you walk past, a clean green note that cuts through the general dampness of the hollow. In the pool, a few water striders skate across the surface, their long legs dimpling the water in small circular depressions that never quite break the surface tension. They move in quick, darting bursts, pausing between movements as if thinking, and their shadows are cast onto the stones below, as dark, magnified ovals that slide and wobble with every shift of the light. You stand and watch them for a moment, your hands tucked into your apron pockets, and the water striders pay you no attention, going about their morning business of drifting and darting. Beyond the brook and the narrow strip of woods, the land opens out into the lower pasture, a long sloping field that runs down toward the farmhouse and the barn. The grass in the pasture is still green from the June rains, though the tips of the timothy has begun to turn a pale tawny gold as they set their seed. The grass is a mixture of many plants, the tall, slender stems of timothy with their dense, cylindrical heads, the softer, broader blades of orchard grass, the dark green spikes of red clover with their round purple blossoms, and scattered throughout, the white, many-petaled clusters of wild carrot that you have always called Queen Anne's lace. The clover is thickest near the bottom of the slope, where the soil is deeper and moister, and you can see the Jersey cows already there, their fawn-coloured coats bright against the green, their heads down and their tails switching slowly. The sound of their grazing does not carry up the hill, but you can see the rhythm of their jaws, the steady side-to-side motion that is as constant as the brook's flow. Above the pasture, the land rises again into a series of wooded ridges that roll toward the east in waves of green and blue. The nearest ridge is mostly maple and beech, the same mix as the hollow, and its flank is dappled with patches of lighter green where the birch groves stand. Beyond it, a higher ridge is darker with hemlock and pine, its crest a jagged line of conifers that stand out against the sky like the bristle of a brush. And beyond that ridge, farther still, the Green Mountains rise in a long, undulating wall that fills the eastern horizon from north to south. The mountains are blue this morning, a soft hazy blue that deepens with distance until the farthest peaks are almost the color of wood smoke, barely distinguishable from the sky. You have seen these mountains every day of your life, and yet they never look exactly the same. Today they are gentle and soft-edged, their shapes rounded by the summer haze, while in autumn they will snap into sharp, hard edges of gold and red, and in winter they will stand white and stark against a cold blue sky. This morning they simply rest along the edge of the world, quiet and unchanging, a frame for the smaller, closer world of the farm. The sky above the mountains is a pale, washed blue, the color of old linen or a bluebird's breast, and it holds only a few clouds. The clouds are the kind that come with fair summer weather, small puffy cumulus that drift very slowly from west to east, their bottoms flat and their tops rounded like piles of new wool. Their shadows move across the ridges below, patches of darker green that slide silently over the forest, and you watch one shadow cross the pasture and climb the far hill, taking perhaps 2 minutes to travel from the brook to the crest. The shadow reaches the cows and passes over them without disturbing their grazing, and then it is gone, climbing into the woods and disappearing, while the cloud sails on, small and white and unhurried. You turn your gaze upward from the pasture and the mountains, and you look at the sky directly overhead. Here, where the beech is in the maple frame, a rough circle of blue, the light is brighter and the sky is a deeper, richer tone. A turkey vulture tilts in slow circles far above, its wings held in a shallow V, the tips of its primary feathers spread like fingers. It does not flap. It simply floats, riding a rising column of warm air that spirals up from the sun-heated pasture, and its circle widens and narrows and widens again as it follows the invisible architecture of the breeze. The bird shadow passes across the canopy leaves with a quick dark flicker that makes you blink. And when you look back up, the vulture has slid 100 feet to the east without any visible effort. You watch it for as long as it stays in your patch of sky, and then it drifts beyond the maple crown and is gone, leaving only the empty blue and the slow procession of the clouds. The air around you has warmed enough now that the mist has entirely burned away, and the hollow is dry and green and filled with the scent of warm earth. The birds are still singing, though their morning chorus has thinned into the sparser, more conversational calls of the full day. A pair of chickadees flit through the beech branches above you, their small bodies barely stirring the leaves, and they call back and forth with their soft, buzzy notes, a sound that seems to carry a question and an answer in equal measure. A phoebe calls from the Springhouse roof, its sharp two-note song sounding like a name repeated, Phoebe be Finn, Phoebe, with a long pause between each pair. The phoebe's nest is under the eaves of the Springhouse, a neat cup of moss and mud tucked into the angle of the rafters, and you can see the bird's dark head peering down at you, its tail bobbing in a quick downward flick that is as characteristic as its voice. The sun has risen high enough now to reach the floor of the hollow, and the patches of sunlight that had been scattered under the trees have widened and merged, so that much of the path and the brook are now in full morning light. The water sparkles where the sunlight strikes it directly, a moving web of bright lines that shiver and dance over the stones, and the watercress leaves glow with an inner, translucent green that makes them look like stained glass. The ferns, too, have caught the light, and their fronds are now bright green on top and shadowed beneath, a contrast that gives them a vivid three-dimensional presence. The whole hollow seems to have awakened fully now, the dim, hushed twilight of early morning giving way to the full, steady illumination of the fine July day, and you feel the warmth of the sun on your shoulders through your wool shawl, a gentle heat that carries no threat of the blistering afternoon to come. You walk a little way up the hollow, following the brook upstream to where the spring actually emerges from the ground. The source is a small, clear pool set into the base of a moss-covered ledge, the water welling up through a bed of clean sand and small gravel that stirs and shifts slightly with the pressure of the flow. The pool is not large, maybe 3 feet across, and it is so clear that you can see every grain of sand at the bottom, every small stone, a few fallen leaves from last autumn still preserved in the cold water, their veins intact but their color faded to a transparent brown. The water rises straight up from some deep fissure in the mountain, a flow that has never ceased in all the years of record, and as you watch it, you feel the same sense of deep, continuous time that the Springhouse always gives you. This water fell as rain, perhaps 100 years ago, perhaps 1,000, and has traveled slow miles through the rock to emerge here, cold and clean and constant, feeding the brook and the trough and the household water and the dairy. You crouch beside the spring and dip your cupped hand into it, and the water is so cold that it makes your hand ache for a moment. You drink a few sips, and the water tastes of nothing but coldness and a faint mineral cleanliness. The best water you know. The taste of the mountain itself. You straighten up, your knees damp from the moss, and you turn to walk back down the hollow to the Springhouse. The path looks different going downhill, the view opening out toward the farm and the ridges beyond, and you pause to take in the full expanse of the morning. The farmhouse sits in its yard below, a white clapboard building with a steep roof and a chimney from which a thin thread of smoke still rises, the fire banked in the kitchen stove. The barn is larger and darker, its unpainted boards weathered to a silver grey, and the cows in the pasture are beginning to drift toward its open doors, where the milking will happen later in the afternoon. The garden beside the house shows rows of green, the corn reaching up in straight, soldierly lines, the bean vines climbing their poles, the dark green leaves of the potatoes in their neat hills. The whole farm lies cradled in the hollow like a thing held in a cupped hand, small and orderly and complete, and you feel the familiar quiet pride of knowing that this is your place, your work, your morning. You reach the Springhouse door and pause with your hand on the latch, taking one more breath of the warm green air of the hollow before you step back into the cool interior. The sounds of the farm float up to you on the breeze, the distant low of a cow, the cluck of the hens, the steady, rhythmic thump of someone splitting kindling near the woodpile. These sounds are the same as they have been every morning of your memory, and they settle into you like a comfort. You lift the latch and the door creaks open, and the chill of the Springhouse wraps around you again, a familiar shawl of cold, and you step inside, leaving the green hillside to the birds and the brook and the slow, patient work of the summer day. The cream rests now in its stoneware crock under a tent of muslin, and you turn back to the pans that still wait on their shelves. 22 shallow earthenware vessels hold the skim milk, the pale bluish liquid that remains after the cream has been lifted away, and each one must be emptied and rinsed before the Springhouse can settle into its midday stillness. The skim milk is not waste. It will feed the pigs or be set aside for cheese making, and in a household where nothing is thrown away, this thin, cool liquid has its own quiet value. You walk to the lowest shelf first, where the 6 pans you skimmed earliest have been resting, their surfaces now perfectly still, the skim milk reflecting the window light in pale, pewter-colored discs. You lift the first pan with both hands, your fingers curling under the cool earthenware rim, your thumbs resting lightly on the top edge to steady the weight. The pan is lighter now than it was when full of whole milk and cream, but it still holds more than a gallon of liquid, and you brace it against your chest as you turn, feeling the slight slosh of the skim milk against the inside wall. The liquid is thin, much thinner than whole milk, and it moves more quickly, more sensitively, responding to every small shift of your hands with a quick, nervous tremor. You walk slowly to the large wooden pail that sits on the floor near the door, a pail made of cedar staves bound with iron hoops, its interior dark and smooth from years of use. The pail has a capacity of perhaps 10 gallons, and it is empty now, waiting. You tip the pan slowly, letting the skim milk pour from one side in a smooth, controlled stream. The liquid is a pale, translucent blue-white, the color of the sky reflected in a thin winter puddle, and as it falls into the pail it makes a soft, hollow sound, a ringing splash that echoes slightly inside the cedar vessel. The stream wavers slightly with the motion of your hands, but you steady it, and the milk flows without splashing over the rim, a neat, quiet transfer. As the pan empties, the stream narrows and then breaks into a series of quick, separate drops that fall with a lighter, higher sound, and then the pan is empty except for a thin, creamy residue that clings to the inner surface, a faint white film that marks where the cream had been. You set the empty pan aside on the floor, tilting it against the stone so it will not tip, and you turn back for the next one. The second pan yields its skim milk with the same slow pour, but this time you notice the faint difference in the color of the liquid. The milk from the jerseys, which had given the cream a golden tinge, leaves behind a skim milk that is very slightly bluer, as if the removal of the rich yellow cream has exposed a cooler undertone. The milk from the Devons is a paler, more neutral white, almost like water from a chalk stream. These differences are subtle, visible only when you are paying close attention, and they will vanish entirely when the milks combine in the pail. But for the few moments that each pan empties alone, you can see the individual character of the milks that came from each cow, a faint signature written in tint and tone. You work methodically along the lower shelf, lifting, carrying, tilting and setting aside, and the pail fills slowly, the level of the skim milk rising inch by inch up the dark cedar staves. The sound of the pouring changes as the pail fills, losing its hollow echo and becoming a deeper, softer splash. The sound of liquid falling onto liquid rather than onto dry wood. A thin foam forms on the surface of the milk in the pail, a lacy white froth made of tiny bubbles that gather around the edges and then slowly subside, popping one by one with a faint, wet fizz that you can hear only if you lean close. The foam carries a faint scent of the barn, a warm animal smell that the cream did not have, a reminder that this milk came from living creatures standing in a sun-warmed pasture. When the lower shelf is empty, you pause to stretch your back, pressing your fists gently into the sides of your spine where a small ache has begun to bloom. The work of lifting and carrying is different from the work of skimming, using different muscles and a different rhythm, and your body notes the change with a quiet, familiar complaint. You ignore it and turn to the west shelf where 8 pans still wait, their skim milk surfaces as still as polished metal. 2 of these pans are the older ones with the cracked glaze, and as you lift the first of them, you notice how the skim milk has seeped very slightly into the tiny cracks, tracing thin, dark lines that follow the network of crazing. The lines are almost beautiful, a delicate, random pattern like the veins of a leaf or the map of a far river system, and you study them for a moment before tipping the pan and watching the milk pour away, the dark lines vanishing as the liquid drains. You empty the west shelf pans one by one, and the pail is now more than half full, the skim milk deep enough that you can no longer see the bottom when you look in. The surface is smooth and pale, a single unbroken sheet of blue-white that reflects the window light in a broad, diffuse gleam. A few small specks of dust or chaff float on the surface, bits that must have fallen in during the pouring, and you skim them off with a clean cloth, leaving the milk as clear as it can be. The pail is growing heavy, and when you try to shift it with your foot, it resists. You will need help to carry it to the barn later, or you will ladle it out into smaller buckets. But that decision can wait. The south shelf holds the last 8 pans, and you move to them with the same slow, patient stride you have kept all morning. These pans are the ones that sat farthest from the trough, their skim milk very slightly warmer than the rest, and as you lift the first one, you notice that the residue on the inside of the pan is a little thicker here, a more noticeable film of cream fat that the skimmer did not quite capture. This residue will rinse away easily in the cold spring water, but its presence reminds you that no skimming is ever perfect, that a small fraction of cream always remains behind to enrich the skim milk and, eventually, the cheese or the pig feed. This small loss is not a failure, it is simply the nature of things, the margin between what you can lift and what the milk will keep. You empty the south shelf pans, and then all 22 of the earthenware vessels stand empty, some on the floor, some still on their shelves, their interiors coated with a thin, milky film that is already beginning to dry and tighten in the cool air. The Springhouse, which was filled with the quiet presence of full pans, now feels more open, the shelves emptier, the light from the windows reaching farther into the corners because there are fewer objects to block its path. The water in the trough sounds louder, or perhaps it is simply that the absence of the pans has removed a layer of muffling, and the trickle and drip now reach your ears with a new clarity. You gather the empty pans into stacks, carrying them 2 at a time to the trough where the cold spring water runs. The trough is deep enough that you can submerge a pan entirely, and you do so, lowering the first pan into the flowing water with both hands. The water is so cold that your knuckles ache immediately. A sharp, clean pain that you have felt 1,000 times, and that never quite becomes ordinary. You hold the pan under the surface, letting the current flow over it, and you watch the thin film of milk loosen and lift away, turning the water briefly cloudy before the current carries the cloud downstream and out through the wooden spout. You use a small cloth made of coarse linen to wipe the inside of the pan, your fingers moving in slow circles, paying special attention to the rim where the cream was thickest and the residue is most stubborn. The cloth is rough against the smooth glaze, making a faint, sandy sound, and it takes only a few passes to leave the earthenware perfectly clean. You rinse each pan thoroughly, then lift it dripping from the trough and set it upside down on the shelf you have designated for clean pans. The shelf is the one nearest the door, where the air moves most freely and the pans will dry quickly. You stack them in columns of 3, each pan resting on the one below with its bottom facing up. the rims nested together with a small, precise click. As the columns grow, the clean pans catch the light on their wet surfaces, the water beading in small droplets that slowly gather and run down the sides in thin, shining streaks. The earthenware, when wet, turns a darker shade of cream, almost the color of the cream itself, and then as the water evaporates, it lightens back to its usual pale buff, the change happening slowly from the rims inward, like a tide receding. The floor of the Springhouse has collected a few small puddles during this process, water splashed from the trough and a few drops of skim milk spilled from the pans, and you take a dry cloth to wipe the stones. You crouch down, passing the cloth over the flat, worn slabs, and the stones darken under the damp cloth, then lighten as they dry almost instantly in the cool air. The cloth picks up the faint traces of milk and water, and you rinse it in the trough and wring it out, your hands working without thought, the cold water numbing your fingers until you can barely feel the weave of the linen. You lay the wrung cloth over the edge of the trough to dry, where it will stay until the evening's work. The skim milk pail now waits by the door, its contents settled and still, the foam entirely gone. You find the wooden lid that fits the pail and set it in place, the lid dropping onto the rim with a soft, hollow thump. The lid is made of the same cedar as the pail, and it fits snugly enough to keep out dust and insects, but not so tightly that air cannot circulate. You will carry this pail to the barn later, but for now it sits in the coolest corner of the Springhouse, near the trough, where the skim milk will stay fresh through the heat of the afternoon. The pigs will drink some of it, relishing the thin, sweet liquid with the same enthusiasm they bring to everything, and the rest will go into the cheese vat, where rennet from the calf's stomach will set it into a soft curd. But those are tasks for another hour, and they do not press on you now. The rinsed pans stand in their neat stacks, the cream crock rests under its muslin cover, the pail is lidded and stored, and the Springhouse has returned to a state of quiet order. The shelves that held the full pans are now bare, their planks swept clean of any stray dust or chaff, and they wait for the evening when fresh milk will fill the pans again. You take a moment to walk along each shelf, checking for anything out of place, a forgotten cloth, a stray skimmer drip, a small chip of earthenware from a cracked pan. You find nothing, and you feel the calm satisfaction that comes from completing a task fully and well, a satisfaction that has no excitement in it, but only a deep, quiet rightness. The Springhouse itself seems to settle with you, the stones cooling, the water running, the light moving slowly across the floor. The sun is now well up, and the light through the windows has lost its golden morning softness, and become a clear, steady white that illuminates every corner of the room. The shadows are short and sharp, the pan's shadows now replaced by the shadows of the stacks, dark circles on the pine planks that will not move until you disassemble the columns. You can see the details that the dimmer morning light hid, the small chip in the rim of one pan, the hairline crack in the glaze of another, the worn spot on the trough stone where generations of hands have braced themselves while rinsing. These details are like old friends, familiar and comfortable, and you notice them without needing to comment on them even to yourself. The smell of the Springhouse has changed now that the cream and milk have been moved or covered. The sweet, dairy scent has faded, and the clean mineral smell of the spring water has risen to replace it, along with the faint, cool odor of wet stone and damp wood. It smells like the inside of a cave, ancient and pure, and you breathe it in deeply, letting it fill your lungs and clear the last traces of the morning's exertion from your mind. Your hands are still cold, the knuckles slightly red from the trough water, and you rub them together slowly, feeling the warmth return to your fingertips in small prickling waves. You glance once more around the Springhouse, checking that the door is securely latched, that the candle stub has been removed from its ledge and set in the tin box with the matches, that no cloth has been left where it might fall into the trough. Everything is in its place, and the Springhouse is ready for the long, still hours of midday, when the sun will beat down on the roof shingles and the air outside will shimmer with heat. But inside the stone room, the temperature will hold steady, the water will keep running, and the covered cream will rest in its cool dark until the butter churn calls it away. You nod once, a small private gesture of completion, and then you open the door and step out into the full morning, leaving behind the orderly silence of the clean pans and the patient water, a silence that will hold until evening returns you to the Springhouse door, with fresh, warm milk and the promise of another morning's rising cream. You bend to lift the stoneware crock from the Springhouse floor, bracing your feet apart on the cool stones and taking the vessel's weight into both hands. The crock is full now, a generous 6 inches of cream resting inside it under the tent of muslin, and it is heavier than you remember from any single trip of the morning. The weight settles against your palms and pulls downward through your arms into your shoulders, a solid, smooth heaviness that is not quite a strain, but asks a certain attention from your body. You lift the crock slowly, letting it rise until its base clears the floor. Then you settle it against your right hip, tilting your pelvis just enough to take the load on the bone, your left hand steadying the rim. The earthenware feels cool through the fabric of your dress and apron, a chill that seeps into your hip and reminds you of the cold spring air that has been its companion all night. You take a steadying breath and turn toward the door. The latch lifts with your free hand, the iron tongue sliding out of its catch with a thin metallic scrape, and you push the door open with your shoulder, stepping sideways over the high stone threshold so that the crock does not bump against the frame. The door swings wide on its iron hinges and the full sound of the brook rushes in to meet you. The bright, tumbling voice of the water spilling down through the hollow, now louder than it was inside, now joined by the rustle of the morning breeze through the beech leaves and the distant, steady clang of the triangle from the farmhouse kitchen, a summons for the workers who are already on their way, their boots crunching on the gravel far below. The crock in your arms is a quiet, heavy presence against all this noise, a still point in the moving air. You step out onto the worn stone slab and pull the door closed behind you with a careful backward nudge of your elbow, hearing the latch fall into place. The sun is well up now, as you knew it would be, and its warmth touches your face and your hands and the back of your neck with a soft, golden pressure that feels like a gift after the chill of the Springhouse. The light is brighter than you expected, and you squint for a moment as your eyes adjust. The world outside painted in the clear, sharp colors of mid-morning. The ferns a brilliant lime green, the sky a deep cornflower blue, the bark of the beech tree glowing silver against the shadowed bank. A small, quick lizard skitters off the warm stone step and vanishes into a crevice between 2 field stones, its tail leaving a faint, scribbling track in the dust that you notice without stopping. The path to the farmhouse is slightly uphill at first, climbing out of the hollow's deepest damp and rising through a narrow corridor of ferns and jewelweed until it reaches the level of the pasture. The grade is gentle, no steeper than the slope of a dooryard, but it is enough to make you feel the weight of the crock more acutely in the muscles of your thighs and the small of your back. You walk slowly, planting each clod deliberately on the packed earth, your free arm swinging just enough to keep your balance, the crock steady against your hip. The path is dappled with patches of shade and sunlight that shift and pulse as the breeze moves the maple branches overhead, and you walk through them as if through a slow, changing stream of warmth and coolness, your body adjusting without thought. The crock makes no sound as you carry it, but its weight has a voice that speaks through your breathing, which has grown slightly deeper and more measured to match the effort. You can smell the cream through the muslin cover, that same clean, sweet, cool scent you noticed inside, and it is joined now by the sharper fragrance of the crushed weeds underfoot, the dusty green smell of the ferns brushing against your skirt, and the distant, rich odor of manure from the barnyard. A smell that is not unpleasant, but simply the background note of a working farm. A honeybee passes your ear with a low, droning hum, its body a dark gold blur, and it circles once around the crock as if confused by the scent of cream before angling away toward the clover in the lower pasture, and you watch it go without breaking stride. At the top of the rise, where the path levels out and the hollow opens into the wider world, you pause to shift the crop to your left hip, giving your right arm a moment of rest. The change of position redistributes the weight across a new set of muscles, and you feel the relief in your right shoulder as the tension drains away, replaced by the new, unfamiliar pressure on your left side. The crock's rim presses a cool, round line into your forearm, a line that will stay on your skin for a few minutes after you set it down, a pale indentation that fades slowly. You look out across the farm while you rest, and the whole spread of your life lies before you. The barn with its grey, weathered boards, the garden with its straight rows of corn and beans, the henhouse with its small dark door, the pasture where the cows are now lying down, in the shade of a single large oak, chewing their cud, with slow, rhythmic jaws. The farmhouse itself is a white clapboard building with a steep roof and a deep porch, its chimney sending up a thin, wavering line of smoke that rises straight into the still air before bending eastward in the higher breeze. And you know that inside the kitchen, the fire is banked and the porridge pot is keeping warm on the back of the stove, waiting for the workers who will come in from the fields when the triangle clangs a second time. You shift the crock back to your right hip and walk on, the path now sloping gently downhill toward the farmyard gate. The gate is a simple wooden affair, 3 rails of split cedar set into posts, and it swings open on leather hinges that have softened with age so that the gate moves almost without sound. You push it open with your hip, careful not to jar the cream, and you pass through into the dooryard where the ground is bare and packed hard from the daily traffic of feet and hooves and cartwheels. A few chickens scratch in the dust near the woodpile, their heads bobbing in quick, jerky motions, and they cluck softly to each other as you pass, scattering only slightly before settling back into their work. The rooster stands on the chopping stump, his red comb brilliant in the sun, and he watches you with one black, glassy eye, making no sound. The kitchen door is held open by a braided rag rug that has been wedged against the jamb, and you step inside, the crock before you, like an offering. The air in the kitchen is warm and still, smelling of wood smoke and rising bread, and the sharp, clean scent of the soft soap that sits in a crock by the sink. The floor is wide pine boards, scrubbed pale and smooth, and your clogs make a soft, hollow sound on them as you cross to the pantry. The pantry is a small room off the kitchen, windowless and cool, its walls lined with shelves that hold crocks and jars and brown paper packages tied with string. And on the floor, on a low wooden pallet, sits the butter churn, a tall stoneware cylinder with a wooden dasher already in place, waiting for the cream. You lower the crock carefully onto the pantry shelf, bending your knees so that the weight transfers smoothly, and when you finally release the vessel and straighten up, your arms feel suddenly light and empty, as if they might float upward without a load to hold them down. The crock sits securely on the wide pine shelf, its muslin cover still in place, and you tuck the edges of the cloth more tightly under the rim before stepping back. The cream will stay cool here, in the darkest corner of the pantry, until the afternoon churning, and you know that the butter it yields will be pale gold and sweet, the best butter of the year. You close the pantry door softly, and the kitchen settles back into its quiet, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the mantel and the distant rhythmic thump of the dasher that will soon begin its work. You walk back out into the dooryard, the sun now warm on your shoulders, and you decide to take a moment before returning to the Springhouse to check the well or gather the eggs, the small tasks that fill the spaces between larger chores. You wander toward the well, which stands under the shade of an old apple tree, its wooden cover closed and its windlass creaking faintly when the breeze stirs the rope. The well water is cold and deep, drawn from the same underground source that feeds the spring, and you often think of the two waters, one rising in the hollow, one waiting in the well, connected by invisible seams of stone. As you stand by the well, your hand resting on the rough wooden cover, a thought drifts across your mind, light and unbidden, like a single cloud crossing an otherwise empty sky. You recall, without urgency, a conversation at the supper table some weeks ago when the men were talking over their tea and you were clearing the plates. The talk had turned to news from the West, and someone, your father perhaps, or your uncle, or a neighbor who had stopped by on his way back from town, mentioned that the great canal across New York State had finally been completed, the locks all fitted and the water let in from end to end. You had listened with half an ear as you scraped the plates into the pig bucket, the words washing over you without sticking, but a few fragments had lodged themselves in your memory. The canal, they said, stretched from the Hudson River all the way to Lake Erie, a distance of 360 miles, most of it dug by hand, by men with shovels and wheelbarrows, by Irish laborers who had come over on the boats and stayed. A boat could now travel from the city of New York, clear to the Great Lakes without touching the ocean, without a single portage, the whole journey on still, flat water. The talk had turned then to what this might mean for farmers here in Vermont, a topic that had made the men lean back in their chairs and frown into their tea. Grain from the western country, they said, would now come east cheaply, the cost of shipping a bushel falling by half or more, and the farmers of the Mohawk Valley would be the first to feel the change. their wheat suddenly competing with the endless fields of Ohio and Indiana. Some worry that even Vermont butter and cheese might feel the pressure, with the canal making it easier to bring butter from farther west to the city markets. Butter that could be sold for a penny less a pound. But others laughed and said the mountain farms would always have their own customers, that no canal could change the taste of good summer cream from cows fed on Vermont grass, and that the world was big enough for all. The conversation had drifted then to other things, the weather and the hay crop and the price of nails at the general store, and you had stacked the last plate and gone out to shut the henhouse door, forgetting the whole matter as soon as the cool evening air touched your face. Now, standing by the well in the warm July sun, the memory rises and fades again, leaving no more trace than the shadow of that distant cloud. The canal is a fact, somewhere far to the west, a ribbon of water cutting through fields and forests that you will never see, carrying boats and barrels and people and news. But it is a fact that has no weight in your hands, no coolness on your skin, no presence in the sound of the brook, or the smell of the cream, or the steady, patient rhythm of the milking and the skimming and the churning. It is as distant as the green mountains on the horizon, as faint as the wood thrush's song from the far ridge, and you cannot feel its pull. Your world is the springhouse and the pans, the water and the white cream rising in the dark, the weight of the crock against your hip and the feel of the skimmer's maple handle in your palm. And these things are enough, more than enough, a circle of work and rest that holds all the meaning you need. You lift your hand from the well cover and turn back toward the springhouse. Your steps slow and easy now, the weight of the cream crock delivered and the morning's main task complete. The sounds of the farm continue around you, the chickens murmuring, the cows lowing softly from the shade, the distant ring of a hammer on iron from the blacksmith's shed down the road. All the small, steady voices of a world that turns on its own axis without hurry. The Erie Canal lies somewhere in the back of your mind, a silent, still presence, a name on a map, a story heard at supper, and you let it rest there, unexamined, while you walk back down the path to the hollow, your hands swinging freely, your apron flapping softly against your legs, the sun warm on your shoulders, and the cool shadow of the springhouse waiting below. The afternoon will bring the butter churn and the buttermilk and the pressing of the golden curds into the wooden mold, but for now the morning is still, and the distant world is a murmur you cannot hear above the brook. The afternoon passes in its own quiet rhythm, the butter churn rising and falling in the pantry, the dasher thumping softly through the cream until the yellow granules of butter separate from the thin, pale buttermilk, and then the washing and the salting and the pressing of the golden mass into the wooden mold that leaves the imprint of an acorn on the top. You move through these tasks without haste, your hands working the butter paddle with the same practiced ease that guided the skimmer in the morning. And when the butter is wrapped in clean muslin and set on the pantry shelf beside the remaining cream, the afternoon has already begun to lengthen into early evening. The sun has slid far to the west, and the shadows of the maple trees stretch long and blue across the farmyard, reaching toward the springhouse hollow like thin, dark fingers. The cows have been milked again, the warm evening milk strained through cloth into the tall wooden buckets, and now you lift the shoulder yoke with its 2 full pails suspended from the iron hooks, settling the curved wooden bar across your shoulders and the nape of your neck, feeling the familiar weight settle into your bones. You walk the path to the springhouse for the second time today, but everything is different from the morning. The light comes from behind you now, a low golden light that gilds the ferns and sets the jewel-weed blossoms glowing like small orange lanterns. The birds are singing their evening songs, softer and more scattered than the dawn chorus, a few thrushes calling from the deep woods, and a single phoebe still repeating its sharp 2-note name from the springhouse roof. The brook runs beside you, its voice unchanged from morning, the same endless glassy tumble over the same smooth stones, and you follow it down into the hollow where the air grows cooler, with every step the damp green coolness rising up to meet you like a welcome. The buckets sway very slightly on their hooks, a gentle rhythmic motion that matches your stride, and the milk inside them is still warm from the cows, carrying the heat of their bodies and the sweet grassy scent of the evening pasture. The springhouse door is closed as you left it, the iron latch cool under your hand. You lift it and swing the door inward, and the chill air washes over you, unchanged from the morning, unchanged from yesterday, as constant as the water that runs through the trough. The interior is dim, lit only by the last rays of the sun slanting through the west-facing window, a single shaft of warm gold that falls across the empty shelves and the stacked dry pans and the dacked floor stones. The candle is still in its tin box, the matches beside it, and you will light it soon. But for this moment, you let your eyes adjust to the dusk, breathing in the cool, clean scent of wet stone and the faint mineral tang of the spring. The clean pans wait on their shelf, their interiors dry and smelling faintly of sunshine from the afternoon air that drifted through the oaken door while you worked elsewhere, and you know that each one is ready to receive the fresh milk you carry. You lower the yoke from your shoulders carefully, setting it down on the flat stone so that the buckets stand upright, their wooden staves dark with the moisture of the milk. The liquid inside is a warm, opaque white, entirely different from the cool, translucent skim milk you poured away this morning, and it steams very faintly in the chill air, a thin wisp of vapor that rises from the surface and vanishes. You dip a clean cloth into the spring water and wipe the shelf where the pans will sit, though it is already clean, and then you begin the slow, methodical work of filling the shallow earthenware vessels for the night. You lift the first bucket with both hands, tilting it over the nearest pan, and the warm milk pours out in a smooth, creamy stream that curls into the pan and rises quickly toward the rim. The sound of the pouring is deeper and softer than the sound of the skim milk this morning, a richer, rounder note that speaks of the fat still suspended in the liquid, and the milk forms a gentle whirlpool on the surface before settling into stillness. You fill the first pan to within an inch of the rim, exactly as you always do, and then you move the bucket to the next pan, and the next, the milk level in the bucket dropping slowly, the load lightening degree by degree. The smell of the fresh milk fills the Springhouse, a warm, sweet, living smell that mingles with the cold mineral air, and you breathe it in as you work, the scent of the day's end, the scent of the cows and the grass and the summer itself. When the first bucket is empty, you set it aside and lift the second, continuing the same steady rhythm, your arms moving in a gentle, repetitive arc. Lift, tilt, pour, pause, move to the next pan. The light through the west window deepens as you work, the gold shifting to a richer amber and then to a soft, dusty orange that catches the edges of the pans and makes the milk glow with a warm inner light. The shadows in the corners of the Springhouse grow thicker and darker, but you do not hurry to light the candle, because you know the space so well that your hands can find the pans and the buckets and the cloths without seeing them, guided by the memory of 1,000 evenings. You fill all 22 pans, the same number as this morning, and the milk in them is a deeper, more opaque white than it was this morning, because the cream has not yet risen. The fat is still dispersed through the liquid in tiny, invisible globules, suspended and warm, and they will not begin their slow ascent until the temperature drops. The pans sit on their shelves in quiet rows, their surfaces smooth and unblemished, reflecting the fading window light in pale, luminous discs. The empty buckets you carry outside and rinse in the brook, the cold water splashing over the wooden staves and washing away the last traces of milk, and then you set them upside down on the stone step to dry overnight, where the morning sun will find them. Back inside, you take the clean muslin cloths from the basket where they have been drying all day, and you cover each pan, laying the cloth over the rim and tucking the edges loosely underneath so that the cloth hovers just above the surface of the milk, touching nothing. The cloths are white and faintly stiff from drying in the sun, and they smell of the open air, a clean outdoor scent that will soon be replaced by the cool, damp smell of the Springhouse. You move along the shelves, covering pan after pan, and the room changes as you do, the bright circles of milk disappearing under the pale muslin until the shelves are a quiet arrangement of white squares against the dark wood, orderly and still. The last pan is covered, and you stand back to look at the rows of cloth-draped vessels, each one holding its gallon and a half of warm milk, each one beginning the slow, invisible process of transformation that will continue through the night. The water in the trough runs on, drawing away the warmth from the air and from the pans, and the temperature in the Springhouse has already begun to drop as the evening outside cools. The stones of the walls, which absorbed the chill of the spring all day, are now radiating that chill back into the room, and you can feel the cold pressing against your cheeks and your hands, the same cold that will coax the cream to rise, slow and steady, while you sleep in the farmhouse on the hill. You take the candle from its tin box and strike a match, touching the flame to the wick, and the small yellow light springs up, pushing the shadows back into the corners. The candle you place on the stone ledge where it sat this morning, and its light flickers gently, a tiny, warm presence in the cooling room. You look around the Springhouse, checking that everything is in order, the pans all covered, the shelves clean, the trough running clear, the door latch oiled and ready. The cream crock from the morning is long since delivered to the pantry, and the skim milk pail has been emptied and scrubbed, and the clean pans that held the morning's skim milk are now filled again with fresh, whole milk, the cycle completed and begun again in the same motion. You linger for a moment longer than is strictly necessary, your hand resting on the edge of the shelf, your eyes moving slowly over the quiet space. The Springhouse at this hour feels different from the morning, less a place of work and more a place of rest. A stone room full of sleeping milk and running water, and the patient ancient cold. The candle flame makes a small soft sound, and the water makes its endless trickle, and the shelves creak once, settling, and then fall silent. You think of the cream beginning its slow rise, the tiny fat globules stirring in the darkness, floating upward through the cooling milk, clustering together at the surface molecule by molecule, and the thought is a comfort, a reminder that the world continues its quiet work without your supervision, that the Springhouse will keep its vigil through the night as it has for all the nights you can remember. You reach up and pinch out the candle flame, not because you need to save the wax, but because you like the way the darkness returns, gentle and complete. The only light now the faint pearly glow of the twilight through the small windows. In the dimness, the covered pans look like rows of pale stones, smooth and still, and the water in the trough catches the last light and holds it in a faint, moving shimmer. You walk to the door and step outside, pulling it closed behind you with a soft, solid thump, and you check that the latch has fallen into place, that no gap remains for a curious fox or a wandering raccoon to find. The door is secure, the building is tight, and the Springhouse becomes a dark shape under the darker trees, a silent presence in the hollow. The evening outside is cool and still, the sky above the hollow a deep, clear blue that is already beginning to darken toward violet in the east. A few early stars have appeared, pale and steady, and the sliver of the new moon hangs low over the western ridge, a thin silver curve that will set before midnight. The brook runs on, its voice somehow louder in the twilight, filling the hollow with its constant liquid murmur, and the ferns and the moss and the wet stones all breathe out the coolness they have stored through the day, wrapping the path in a fresh, damp scent. You stand for a moment on the stone step, your hand still on the latch, and you let the peace of the hollow settle over you. A peace that is not empty, but full of the sound of water and the smell of green things and the solid, enduring presence of the stone Springhouse behind you. The walk back up to the farmhouse is slow, your feet finding the familiar path without need of light, your body tired in a good, clean way that comes from a day of work well done. The windows of the farmhouse glow yellow in the distance, the kitchen lamp already lit, and you can see the silhouette of someone moving past the window, perhaps your mother setting the table for a late supper, perhaps your father washing his hands at the sink. The sight is a welcome one, a small, warm beacon at the end of the day, and you walk toward it with a steady, unhurried step, the brook fading behind you until it is only a distant whisper, a thread of sound woven into the fabric of the evening. You pause at the gate to look back one time, as you often do, at the dark mouth of the hollow and the darker shape of the Springhouse hidden within it. Everything is as it should be, the pans full, the water running, the cream beginning its slow secret ascent through the milk. Tomorrow morning you will rise before dawn and walk this path again, and you will lift the latch and light the candle and uncover the pans, and the cream will be there, thick and pale and sweet, risen through the night as it always rises, as it has risen in this hollow since the first farmer built the first Springhouse, as it will rise long after you are gone. The thought is not sad. It is as steady and as comforting as the water itself, a connection to something older and larger than your own small life, a rhythm that carries you and holds you and asks nothing but your presence. You open the kitchen door and step into the warmth and the lamplight, and the day closes behind you like a book gently shut. The Springhouse settles into the darkness of the hollow, the water running, The cream rising, the stone walls holding their ancient cold. The night passes in silence, and the cream climbs slowly toward the surface, molecule by molecule, hour by hour, patient and certain, without hurry and without end.